Chapter 1393. For Marquis Gouda, the group of nobles in front of him were hesitant and indecisive. The time they spent discussing was the longest. Vampires could quarrel with each other for decades or even longer because of a boring argument. They would not reach a consensus in the end. He chose to leave his seat. If he could not get the agreement of more than 70% of the nobles, he would not choose to wake up the Grand Duke. After leaving the place for discussion, Marquis Gouda immediately called for a confidant. He was conveying something to this confidant. The guys inside need a little stimulation to reach a consensus. I need to give them a little stimulation. Do it cleanly. The confidant quickly took the order and left. At this time, a group of guards hurried over from the corridor of the palace. Marquis Gouda directly asked the purpose of their visit. This group of guards received Busby's order to come here. The purpose was to inform the nobles staying here that a powerful vampire killer had appeared in the farm tonight, and that 20 to 30 vampires had already been killed. This pair of guards who were sent here, other than informing him, also had the intention of strengthening the palace's defenses. Marquis Gouda, who knew the cause and effect of this matter, felt a chill in his heart. I know about this matter. The other nobles are all inside. I will inform them. Then, I will leave the patrol outside the palace to you. The guards took the order and left. After the guards left, Marquis Gouda slowly returned to the place where the nobles were discussing. Looking at the group of nobles who were discussing whether to wake up the Grand Duke, Marquis Gouda just kept silent and did not intend to say anything. Vampire killer? I don't mind this killer appearing here. Marquis Gouda suddenly smiled. Power is the best medicine to reconcile fear and cowardice. David calmly walked in the town of the farm. Ever since he left the storage room in the 7th dorm, he had been thinking about a lot of things. Selling his memories made him feel more relaxed than ever. However, the knowledge he had learned while living on the farm didn't disappear because of the sale of his memories. In his memories, he only removed the voices and shadows that he had grown up with. In all of his past memories, he was now alone. He was alone in the classroom, looking at the blackboard filled with words. He was running in the field, and the people around him were disappearing one by one. In the end, the whole school was empty except for him. In the cafeteria, people disappeared one by one. On the road, people disappeared one by one. During those 18 years, it was like living in a world where only he existed. He was like a machine, silently learning. There was nothing to be happy about, nothing to be sad about. There was no one to remember and no one to hate. His life seemed to have started from the time he accidentally got the opportunity to escape from the farm, from the time he met the human of the Revolutionary Army, from the time he met the leader of the Revolutionary Army, from the time he met that woman. Does your world no longer exist? Do you want to try and live for me first? While the sale of the past made the memories of the past vague, it also meant that the memories of the present had become abnormal. After all, everything that he remembered now started from that encounter. Stop! In the dark night, there was a heavy shout from David's side. Was it the vampires' guard in the town, the patrol team? No, it was just the members of the inspection team. 2 humans and 1 low-level vampire. David stopped at the start of the shout and raised his hands. He looked at the inspection team members who were quickly approaching him, showing quite calmness. Even if it was not this time, after joining the Revolutionary Army, he had a lot of experience sneaking into the farms of the big clans. He knew that the most important thing to do at this time was to keep calm and try to calm his heartbeat as much as possible. The vampire's hearing was very strong. They could easily judge the human's psychological state by listening to the heartbeat sound. Who are you? Why are you still wandering in the town at this time? Raise your head, let me see you clearly. It was the leader of the low-level vampire who asked. David slowly raised his head at this time. This vampire suddenly frowned and coldly shouted, "What are you carrying? Take it out." I picked it up on the road. I really want to hand it to the noble master. David finally allowed his appearance to appear in their line of sight. They quickly recognized that this wasn't a face that was commonly seen. A completely unfamiliar face was obviously not a human male who worked in the farm. Catch him! Cold light flashed. When the two human inspection team members approached David, their footsteps slowed down instantly. Another step forward, the two people's heads suddenly fell down. Blood splashed out. At the same time, David nimbly rushed out from between the two people and made a stab at the low-level vampire. Of course, it was still not as good as the vampire's physical quality, but the speed was so fast that it could not be measured by ordinary people. However, facing David's sneak attack at this time, the vampire obviously did not care too much about it. Because in its view, the attacker's speed was too slow. It casually pulled out the sword, lifted the sword and slashed. As long as it used a little strength, it could directly split the opponent, right? After all, humans were still two fragile creatures. But what this low-level vampire did not expect was that its weapon would be directly cut open by the strange straight knife in the opponent's hand in the next moment. Easily cut open. In a short moment of shock, it felt a chill from its neck. Looking down, its neck had been cut open by the opponent, blood was flowing out. But the vampire's strong vitality did not make it lose its ability to move. It sneered. At this time, it stretched out its arm, and instantly clawed David's shoulder with its sharp fingers. Didn't anyone tell you that even if a vampire's neck is cut, he won't die? It sneered. But because of the broken vocal cords, its voice became terrifying and harsh. Its steel-like fingers deeply penetrated into David's muscles, a trace of pain flashed in his eyes. At this critical moment, at David's sleeping arm, something slipped from the sleeve of his hand. It was a glittering dagger. Holding the dagger in his hand, David did not hesitate and directly stabbed the dagger into the heart of this low-level vampire. The moment the dagger pierced into the heart of the low-level vampire, as if it was piercing into the soil, the opponent did not seem to have reacted. He could not understand how this human could have a weapon that could hurt him. The heart of a vampire was not really fragile. It was the strongest part of the vampire's body. The heart would naturally produce a layer of horny substance like a shell, protecting this important organ. This dagger? But obviously it could not get the answer, because the moment it fell, it had already died directly. David gasped for breath, forcefully pulled out the vampire's claw on his shoulder, then stepped on its body and pulled out the dagger. David looked at the things in his hands. The tang knife that he bought back, and when he left, when Anne and the merchant were not paying attention, he quietly took the dagger away. That's right. He took the dagger away. And the merchant did not find anything. He did it. He really did it. Without scheming, without planning, even without sacrifice. In a one-on-one battle, he successfully killed the vampire. He did it. David's heart was filled with ecstasy. But he resisted the urge to laugh out loud at this time. But the muscles on his cheeks seemed to be twitching. Gradually, he calmed down. He quickly left this place. There were no tools to dispose of the corpses, and the smell of fresh blood would soon attract the nearby vampires. David obviously did not intend to deal with more than a few vampires alone, even though he had tasted the fruits of victory from killing vampires. Just as he turned to leave, a small stone suddenly rolled out. David subconsciously looked in the direction where the stone rolled from. He heard 3 cats' meows, each with a special length. This was a means of communication used by the Revolutionary Army. David frowned. This time, when they sneaked into Torito's clan farm, everyone was caught. Later, only 4 escaped in the chaos. He had already seen Meow Meow, but Meow Meow suddenly had a strong power. David speculated that Meow Meow was likely to have met the mysterious merchant, and like himself, she also sold her memory. So, after David recognized her, Meow Meow showed a different reaction. While he was deep in thought, David had already followed the signal and soon arrived at another street. In front of him, there was a figure walking at a very fast pace. He knew that the figure in front of him stopped at a stable. David. At this time, the figure turned around, and at the same time, lifted the cloak on his body. It was probably soaked in horse feces and urine, and it smelled terrible. David opened his mouth. This was one of his companions in this operation, and one of the 4 who successfully escaped. It's really you, David. At this time, the companion rushed in front of David and grabbed David's shoulders with both hands. What did I see? You killed a vampire with your own hands. Oh, David, you are our hero. It stinks. Don't touch me. Yes, it's great to be able to find you. David also showed an excited expression. Are you alone? No. The companion quickly said, Ali was also here. But he was seriously injured, so I could only hide him in this stable. Oh right, David, are you the only one who escaped? David secretly broke free from the companion's hands. Let's not talk about this first. Take me to see Ali. I still have some recovery medicine here. That's great. The companion was very excited and quickly led David into the stable. David casually asked, How did you escape? Did you see anyone else? The companion shook his head and said, No, we didn't dare to hide in the dormitory, thinking that the vampires would definitely start a search in every dormitory. So, we hid in the stable and waited for a chance to escape when the sun came up. David nodded. The companion called Ali had already seen Ali hiding in a pile of hay. There was a very deep wound on his abdomen, and now it was just a simple bandage. It was impossible to really stop the bleeding. At this time, Ali could not even open his eyes, and looked like he was in a daze. Let me see him. David directly walked forward and squatted down. At the same time, he began to carefully remove the cloth wrapped around Ali's abdomen. This time we really failed completely. The companion sighed heavily at this time. We failed to live up to the trust of our companions. Now, even leaving alive is a problem. Are you afraid? David suddenly turned around and asked. The companion shook his head. The operation failed, and we were captured and tortured for such a long time. When did you see me beg for mercy? Am I afraid of death? I just feel angry. Angry at your own weakness? David said indifferently. The companion did not hear the change in tone and just nodded. Yes, I resent my own weakness. Not only that, I also resent the traitor. Traitor? David could not help but frown. The companion said, Yes, traitor. David, haven't you thought about why our operation failed this time? We have been active so many times. Even if we can't get the ideal results, we won't be like this time, all of us being captured. So, there must be a traitor among us. We have been betrayed. David frowned. Who do you think it is, among us? Not among us. The companion said seriously. I suspect it is the person we met this time. Have you forgotten? On the night of the operation, the contact of the Torito clan did not appear at all. But we were all caught in one fell swoop. David muttered. The leader said that our companions are hiding in every farm. But in order to ensure the safety of our companions, their identities are absolutely confidential, and only a few people know about them. Even for me, before this operation, the leader did not tell me who the contact was, but only gave me a secret signal. No matter what, I will definitely find the traitor. The companion gritted his teeth at this moment. David stood up, patted his companion's shoulder, and said as if to comfort him, Don't worry, I will definitely be able to leave here safely. The companion could not help but be startled, then he smiled. David, you are wrong, it is us. Really? David smiled slightly, then his expression suddenly became cold. What did I say wrong? David. You? The companion opened his eyes wide, lowered his head, and clearly saw a shining dagger piercing his heart at this moment. The dagger directly twisted the companion's heart several times. David looked at the fellow who was slowly falling down and said indifferently, It is safer for me to be alone, so I am not wrong. Later, David found some kerosene in the stables and set the stables on fire. It was probably another mess, wasn't it? He thought for a while, then put on the extremely smelly clothes that the companion used to cover the smell at the beginning, and quickly left. Baidu search 81 Chinese networko. No advertising message. Chapter 1394. David chose to start a fire and create chaos as a cover for his escape. More than a month ago, when he sneaked into the farm, he had already figured out the structure of the farm. Among the people on this trip, Meow Meow and another member of the Revolutionary Army were originally from the farm, so this further deepened David's familiarity with the current environment. The fire soon began to spread from the stable, followed by a few nearby buildings. When the patrolling vampires arrived, the fire was already quite fierce. Of course, this kind of fire was difficult for humans to put out in a short time, but for vampires it did not take too much time. However, what the vampires didn't expect was that a bell suddenly rang in the farm, followed by a huge explosion. At that moment, one of the towers in O Farm collapsed in an instant. This was the explosive that the Revolutionary Army had buried in this tower early on, and it was originally used as part of their original plan. However, the Revolutionary Army led by David had been captured before the operation began. Now, not only did David set fire to a few buildings, but he also detonated the explosives hidden in this tower at the first moment. The explosion didn't hurt any of the vampires, but it was enough to attract the attention of the entire farm, especially the Wu crops that lived in the farm. Lights on. Due to the explosion, the entire farm town was lit up. Chaos. Greater chaos would be his capital for a safe retreat. Under the night sky, David moved even faster in the shadows of the town and dashed towards Mating Farm. At this time, David met Meow Meow again. This time, Meow Meow seemed to be injured, leaning against the left side of a dark alley alone. Half an hour ago, in the square, Meow Meow was dealing with dozens of vampires alone. She may be quite indifferent to the Revolutionary Army that she had just rescued, but after leaving them, she resolutely chose to slaughter the vampires in the town in a high-profile manner. Maybe it was just a way for her to vent her anger at the injustice of fate, or maybe she just wanted to kill a few more vampires, or maybe she wanted to focus the attention of all the vampires in the farm on herself. Who knew? She was all alone now, and the only thing she could rely on was the black flame that was resting on the wound on her cheek. This black flame was indeed powerful. Before she got it, she could totally describe herself as a weak woman, right? Meow Meow Meow's breath was slightly unstable as she looked around at the increasing number of vampires around her. How many vampires were in the farm now? She did not have a specific idea, but she knew that her physical strength seemed to be running out. The powerful black flame obviously did not give her endless physical strength. After all, it was just the power of a weapon, not something that could fundamentally change her life structure. But, let's continue to kill. It seemed to be talking to her like this. This battle quickly attracted Basby's attention. Ever since he was ambushed by Mekong on his way to dormitory number 7, Busby had changed his route to dormitory number 7. Instead, he commanded the vampires to hunt down the vile vampire killer. At this time, under the siege of many vampires, Meow 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 was temporarily confined in the space of the square. Buzzed quickly walked over with a few guards following behind him. He had already changed into a new set of clothes, but after tearing off his wings, he still looked a little dispirited. What's the situation now? A subordinate quickly came back and reported, Master Buzzed, we have temporarily stalled this killer, but the opponent is too terrifying. She can use a strange flame, and once our men touch it, they will either die or be injured. Buzzed had experienced the power of this flame himself, so he did not say anything about his subordinate's fear. He nodded indifferently, then looked into the battlefield, his brain frantically analyzing the situation. She seems to have slowed down. Is it a problem with her physical strength? Strange, the power of this flame, why does it seem a little unstable? Master, you said it's unstable? A subordinate beside him looked at Buzzed in surprise. Buzzed was muttering to himself, but his eyes never left the battle between Meow Meow and the vampires. Suddenly, Buzzed waved his hand and ordered in a deep voice, "Don't come into contact with her or engage in pointless close combat. The main thing is to avoid this killer's flame attack. Keep your distance. If the flame burns you, as long as it doesn't touch your heart, break your limbs immediately." "Yes, master." Following Buzzed's order, the vampires in the square scattered at once. They had to obey Buzzed's order. Originally, as the trusted aide of the acting Grand Duke, Buzzed had a high authority to control the guards, and now he was in charge of the clan's authority. As long as it didn't touch his heart, he would break his limbs immediately. Obviously, he could still accept the order. For the vampires, breaking their limbs was just a matter of sucking more human blood afterwards, and they could recover. In just a short while, the vampires who changed their fighting style gradually exhausted Meow Meow's physical strength to a terrifying extent. She even had to gasp for air, and her body was dripping with sweat. She even felt that she was showing slight symptoms of dehydration. What was worse, because she couldn't devour the vampires' souls for a long time, the power of the black flame began to decrease rapidly. "I'm afraid I can't hold on for much longer." At this moment, Buzzed suddenly sent his voice into the battlefield, into Meow Meow's ears. "You can't hold on any longer, can you? Surrender, you can't escape. Then you can come and capture me personally." "Traitor!" Meow Meow sneered directly, and then suddenly urged the black flame in her hand. The flame instantly spread out, and its power seemed to have increased suddenly, causing the surrounding vampires to be afraid again. Again. "Traitor?" Buzzed frowned. He didn't know this killer woman in front of him, but why did she call him a traitor again and again? "Don't bluff." Buzzed calmed himself down and continued in a low voice, "This strange flame of yours, there's a limit to its use, right? Maybe it's affected by your physical strength, or something else. For example, it can provide power by burning our bodies, right?" Meow Meow was shocked, but her face was still as cold as ice, and the power of the black flame in her hand seemed to have increased a little. "Is that so? Then you can come and try. Of course, you'll have to bear the consequences. I've analyzed it. Every time the power of your flame begins to weaken, you'll be very eager to attack us. Every time you succeed in burning our bodies, its power will recover again." Buzz said indifferently, "As for whether this theory is correct or not, as long as I continue to fight like this, we'll know the answer after a long time." "Then come and try it." Accompanied by Meigong's cold shout, she waved her hands, and the black flames suddenly burst out. In an instant, like a burst of fog, it spread out in all directions, without any blind spots, and covered all the vampires in the square. Seeing this, the vampires couldn't help but be shocked. No matter whether the power of this thing was weakened or not, once it came into contact with it, it would not disperse, it was real. The vampires had no choice but to hurriedly scatter. Even Buzzed subconsciously wanted to avoid this burst of flame because he had suffered a loss once before. Unexpectedly, the burst of flame was very frightening, but it came and went quickly, and in just a short while, it had already disappeared. "Master, the killer disappeared. Go after her." Buzzed calmly gave the order. She shouldn't have gone far. "Once you find her, as I said, if she's burned, as long as it's not a vital part, immediately break her limbs. Remember, don't act alone." "Yes, master." Then, Buzzed pondered for a few seconds and called over another subordinate, ordering, "Take a small group of people to the place where the nobles are staying today and tell them about this matter. Tell them to stay where they are and don't wander around." Okay, the subordinate thought. This message would definitely be delivered, but as for whether the nobles would listen to it or not, it was not up to him to decide. Seeing that his subordinates had already done their jobs, Buzzed slowly exhaled. He still felt the pain from the wound on his back where he tore off his wings. Perhaps he really should drink some blood to replenish his energy. Since falling into the lost rift, he had not stopped to rest after several battles, let alone eat. He slowly ordered the subordinate beside him, "Prepare a batch of mass-produced pure blood for me." At this time, the subordinate suggested, "Master, why don't I go and call the crops for you? Doesn't the clan have a rule that if it's during wartime, you can directly drink the blood of the crops to recover? Besides, how can mass-produced pure blood compare to the fresh blood of the ancients?" Buzzed just glanced at the subordinate expressionlessly. The subordinate suddenly trembled in fear, quickly lowered his head, and quickly said, "I'll go and prepare the mass-produced pure blood bag for you right away." At this moment, a subordinate quickly walked over from not far away. His arm was forcefully grabbing the wrist of a girl, violently pulling her over. "Master, we found this crops nearby. Maybe she's the accomplice of the female assassin just now." Buzzed didn't speak, glancing at the girl who was caught, then his eyes suddenly turned cold. He flashed past, and saw the vampire's arm that grabbed the girl's wrist was instantly cut off. The vampire with a broken arm fell to the ground in pain. He covered the wound on his arm in fright, but he didn't dare to scream. He could only look at Busby in fright. He watched as Busby slowly put the girl into his cloak and hugged her gently. The girl was Mina. At this time, the girl seemed to be hugging something tightly in her arms. It seemed to be a roll of something. At the same time, she also buried her face in Buzz's arms as if she was afraid. Her body trembled slightly. "Continue your work." Ignoring the vampire with the broken arm who fell to the ground, Buzzed coldly glanced at all the vampires around him. The group of vampires suddenly became silent. "Let's go." And these words were said by Buzzed looking down at Mina in his arms. Just like this, he took Mina away from the eyes of the subordinate. The subordinates didn't understand. They didn't understand why this master suddenly became so cruel. They could only silently watch Buzzed leave with the girl. TSK. He hasn't really promoted to a superior noble yet, but he has learned the ways of a superior noble so quickly. He sees this crops as his private property, right? Shoo, lower your voice. He is now in charge of the clan's authority. Humph. He's just lucky that Prince Bailey. Forget it, let's not talk about it. The square gradually became empty. I was too careless. Leaning against the cold wall of the alley, Meow Crow felt as if she had inhaled fire. The burning sensation made her feel suffocated. She gasped for air, but she still could not slow down her heartbeat. Obviously, her violent movements had exceeded the range that her body could bear. Out of self-protection, her body had gone beyond her will and stopped. The black flame attached to her cheeks was still burning, but it was like a flame that was about to be extinguished. It was like the last lit match in the hand of the little match girl in a fairy tale that she had heard before. But obviously, it didn't give her the same warm and wonderful feeling as the little match girl. Footsteps sounded. Were they vampires? But she couldn't even move her fingers. The footsteps gradually approached. She wasn't too frightened, instead, she faintly felt relieved. Overall, she had killed a lot of vampires tonight, so it didn't seem to be a loss, right? They were originally people who were about to die. They should have already successfully escaped, right? Meow. It's really you. The footsteps had stopped, but what followed was a slightly familiar voice. Meow Meow raised her head in surprise, looking at the man wrapped in a foul stench, and subconsciously opened her mouth. David squatted down and at the same time pulled the cloth off his face, revealing his original appearance. "It's me, David." Of course, she recognized him after he pulled the cloth off his face. Meow didn't meet David's gaze, she just slightly lowered her face, hiding her injured cheek in the dark corner of the hood. Didn't you escape with them?" "I came back. We still have 2 companions who escaped at that time. I was worried, so I stayed," David said seriously. You could have left, why did you come back?" Meow frowned. What can you do alone? I can't leave them in the lurch. David took a deep breath and said, If I leave them in the lurch, then what's the difference between me and those vampires? He looked at Meow and said softly, Aren't we companions? She opened her mouth, as if something had touched her heart, and looked at him blankly. Chapter 1395. He calmly met Maming's gaze. After a few breaths, he remembered something and quickly took out a water bottle. Drink some water first. You seem to be dehydrated. Maming did not refuse. She really needed it. Although David's words touched her heart, it did not make Maming let down her guard. This was because she had seen that when a person was good at lying, they could lie until they died. She did not believe David's words so easily. Even though David had returned from a dangerous situation alone, his words seemed so sincere. Perhaps, a few hours ago, she would have been very touched by his words. That man was the same. He said a lot of nice words. Oh right, where is Martin? Seeing that Meow Ming was no longer as cold as before, David asked, I remember that you escaped with him. Why are you the only one left? David did not know if it was his imagination, but he felt that Maming seemed to have become much colder at this moment. The feeling that she gave people suddenly became cold, like ice. That person is no longer here. And her emotionless answer. No longer here. Naturally, he was dead. David knew that Maming and Martin were both born in this farm. Later on, they successfully escaped and joined the Revolutionary Army. Their relationship had always been good. Martin's death was probably a huge blow to her. Was that why her temperament changed? Or rather, it was because she had obtained power. He wanted to find the source of her power from Maming. Perhaps he could take it himself. Just like how he took an extra dagger from the merchant. See, isn't this a simple matter? As long as you do it quietly and slowly, no one will notice that you are doing something bad. So, what is the secret of your power? David quietly observed everything in the Mekong Delta. At this time, Meow put down the water bottle. After a short rest, she regained some of her strength. She used the hood to cover half of her face, and then stood up with the help of the wall. The vampires are still looking for me. I can't keep hiding here. What do you plan to do? David nodded and asked. Maming was silent. She did not have any plans. After obtaining the power for revenge, she only thought about how to kill the vampires. She didn't even think about leaving this place. But it turned out that her physical strength was not enough for her to keep going. If she wanted to continue her revenge, she needed to learn how to adjust. Adjusting the power of the black flames, adjusting the devouring requirements of the black flames, as well as more combat experience. He had to bring out the full potential of the black flames. Meow meow, let's meet up with the others at the mating farm. We'll leave when the sun rises. Seeing that Magong was silent, David suggested, This mission has failed, we must return to the base immediately. But, Meow Meow frowned. Didn't you say you were looking for your other two companions? David let out a long sigh and showed a painful expression. He lowered his head and grabbed his shoulder that was pierced by the vampire's claw. He held the wound tightly. Blood began to seep out of the cloth wrapped around the wound. David said bitterly, I'm useless. All I still has. He raised his head, took a deep breath, and said slowly, Let's not talk about this. Let's hurry up and leave this place. Even if the two of them sacrifice themselves here, I will take their souls away no matter what. Meow Meow looked at the two necklaces around David's wrist. These were things that the companions of the Revolutionary Army would wear. If they died without a burial place, they should at least take this token with them. Take his soul away. The children living in the farm had never lived in the modern world. The method they learned was said to be a common practice during the war. It was more popular in the Revolutionary Army. Meow Meow herself wore a similar token. Looking at David's painful expression, Meow Meow's frown eased a little. She looked at David and said indifferently, If that's the case, don't die so easily. David looked at her and smiled. The same goes for you. His smile was so beautiful that Meow Meow could not help but be distracted for a moment. This person, if he was in such a situation, would he be so determined? Meow Meow did not know why such a thought suddenly popped up in her mind. She just turned around under David's slightly puzzled gaze and said indifferently, "Let's leave this place first. If I remember correctly, there should be a sewer passage leading to the mating farm up ahead." Sewer passage? David could not help but be surprised. Meow Meow quickly said, "When I was living here, my character setting was the naughty type. Once, out of curiosity, I sneaked into the sewer. Following the sewer, you can reach the mating farm." She paused for a moment before mocking herself. "What I didn't expect was that the character setting that the nobles set for me allowed me to discover the truth of the farm. Perhaps those high and mighty nobles wouldn't even know about this." David suddenly said, "I heard from the leader that many of our companions who joined the Revolutionary Army before us accidentally discovered the truth and planned to escape. But there were also some who chose to stay after discovering the truth." Meow Meow frowned. "Are you talking about those mysterious supporters who have been hiding in the farms all this while?" David nodded and then said seriously, "Meow Meow, have you thought about why we failed so thoroughly this time? Our men were all exposed and captured. Not a single one of them managed to escape." Meow Meow said, "You mean we were betrayed by the supporters here?" David nodded. "But we do not know who the traitor is. Meow Meow, you were once born in this farm. Who do you think is the traitor who betrayed us?" "Busby." Meow 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 suddenly whispered the name. David did not hear it clearly and asked subconsciously, "What did you say?" Meow Meow shook her head. At this moment, she suddenly pushed David away and pointed her finger. A small flame shot out and instantly hit a huge wolfhound and began to burn. The huge wolfhound struggled painfully in the black flame but soon turned into ashes. "It's the blood-sucking wolfhound reared by the nobles." David's face suddenly became serious. "It seems that in order to capture us, these vampires have really spared no effort. But is this black flame the power that Meow Meow obtained?" "This way." After killing the blood-sucking wolfhound, Meow Meow did not hesitate and directly sped up. Because the flame burned the wolfhound, it temporarily replenished its power and calmed down a little. Night. Perhaps it was almost dawn. On the roof of a big house not far away, a pair of eyes silently watched the two figures quietly moving in the town. Luaccio. Two people who no longer have hearts have finally met. Just like this, when the two figures disappeared in the normal range, Boss Luo slowly stepped back a few steps and his figure gradually faded. Soon, Busby brought Mina to a nearby house. This was a small theater, which was usually used as the place for crop-s activities. In the theater's lounge, the young girl Mina held something tightly in her hand and handed it to Busby with both hands. "This is..." Busby was startled and looked at the thing in Mina's hand with a puzzled expression. This was a scroll of animal skin. Busby knew what it was. It was obviously something that the three people of unknown origin found in the Lost Rift. And it was the second diary. "Brother, have you forgotten? Mina had a hard time to get it from them." She hugged Busby's waist and looked up at him. Mina almost exposed herself. "But at least I got it, this way. No one will find out brother's identity." "Mina." Busby lowered his head and hugged the girl's body tightly. He took a deep breath and smelled the girl's hair mixed with the fragrance of her body. "Thank you for your hard work." His fangs grew out of his lips little by little. He only heard the girl's whisper, "Brother, are you hungry? Mina is ready." Really, I can't control myself anymore." Busby slowly closed his eyes and let his instincts drive his body. Feeling the feeling of the fangs piercing his skin, he gradually lost himself in a huge vortex. Clang! The clan's authority in his hand suddenly fell from his palm. After a long time, the girl tidied up her collar and then snuggled into Busby's arms like a well-behaved kitten. She asked innocently, Brother, will you always be with Mina? Yes. He was like a person who was absent-minded, and his eyes were empty. Then, they gradually regained their color. Busby took a deep breath and helped the girl up. Mina, you stay here and don't leave, Busby said quickly. Wait for me to deal with the killer, and then I'll come back for you. This killer's target is only the vampires. She probably doesn't intend to hurt the children here, so you should be safe. The girl obediently buttoned a button on Busby's collar. Mina will wait here for brother to come back. Be careful on the way. Busby nodded and handed the second diary to Mina. Help me keep this safe? Wait for me to come back. The girl gently sent the vampire out of the lounge, and then lay down on the sofa in the lounge. She held the second diary with both hands and slowly opened it, reading it by herself. From time to time, the girl would laugh a few times, as if she was very happy. Cloak that can make you invisible, boots that can increase speed. In addition, and took out a pair of gloves from her ring, called gloves that can increase strength. Oh, she suddenly felt like she had become a hero who could slay a dragon. Well, which storybook did she read about the dragon-slaying story? She was a person who liked to think nonsense. Even if she was doing something dangerous, she couldn't stop this obviously bad habit of hers. But what could she do? After all, this was the character setting that was created from the moment she was born, delusional Chunibyo. Who knew what a Chunibyo was? She knew about delusions. Anyway, before she became an adult, she was told that as long as she liked delusions, she could do it every day. Of course, she used to say a lot of words that were very shameful now, in front of her companions. What a dark history! And shook her head in a self-deprecating manner. In the end, the item that the mysterious traveling merchant gave her was very reliable. At the very least, she had successfully entered the mating farm, with the help of the equipment she was wearing, and she did not alarm the vampires along the way. Miss and even naughtily mixed some of her saliva into the breakfast of a vampire she met on the way. Finally, he managed to enter the mating farm without any danger. In fact, and didn't know much about the mating farm. The adult descendants of the ancients who stayed to work in the mating farm were basically forbidden to enter this place. Of course, it didn't mean that and didn't know something about the mating farm. It was like in order to prevent them from being disloyal, they were arranged to watch the execution of the captured Revolutionary Army. In order to make them more loyal, they were also allowed to see the situation of their kind in the mating farm. But Anne felt that what she had seen before was not even half as real as the mating farm. She was currently in a huge house, an icy cold house. Rows and rows of women were currently imprisoned on chairs. Their clothes had long since been stripped off, and there were even breast pumps on their bodies. The women were blindfolded and couldn't move at all. Perhaps they hadn't washed their bodies for a long time, and the whole room was filled with the stench of sweat. However, the sweet milk was constantly being extracted and then accumulated through the pipes. Anne's legs were trembling as she walked among these women, looking at their withered bodies. Suddenly, as if she was stimulated by something, she suddenly walked in front of a woman and reached out to untie the thing on her head. Hollow, sunken, and skinny. What kind of desperate gaze was this? She suddenly collapsed in front of the woman's gaze. Chapter 1396. And shuddered all of a sudden. Instinctively, she covered the woman's eyes again before she could even think. But then what? What should she do? Who could tell her? What should she do next? Even with the cloak of invisibility, she didn't feel safe at all. This horrible room gave her a strong sense of uneasiness all the time. The tools that were installed on all the women here seemed to have been placed on her at some point, draining all her strength out of thin air. And found it difficult to move her feet. It was as if her feet had grown roots and were rooted in the room. Suddenly, Anne heard footsteps. She turned her head subconsciously and saw two servants of the vampires coming in. They were not even low-level vampires. They had only transformed once and were almost the lowest labor force in the vampire circle. But even so, they were much more powerful than her, and stepped back subconsciously. She watched the two vampires coming closer. Her heart beat. It was crazy, as if her heart was about to jump out, until she unconsciously stepped back and bumped into the wall, making a soft sound. What's that sound? Vampires were very sensitive to sound. At this time, they looked in the direction of the strange sound. But obviously, this vampire didn't see anything, and neither did the other vampires who came in with him. Did I hear wrongly? The two vampires looked around in confusion but didn't find anything. Then they started their work, collecting, feeding, and checking the health of these individuals who were producing milk. She was invisible now, seeing the actions of the two vampires, and breathed a sigh of relief. But she still didn't dare to move. She didn't even dare to open her eyes and look here carefully. The women, those who were confined to the chairs, their teeth were pulled out, and tubes were inserted into their mouths. Every day they were fed liquid food through the tube. Gurgle, 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 gurgle. It was like a factory. Liquid food was poured into their mouths through a pipe. When it entered their esophagus, there was a faint gurgling sound. Then, the two vampires activated some kind of device and began to extract the essence of life from their bodies. Even though she had already imagined what kind of scene it would be when she entered, and only felt the true terror when she saw it with her own eyes. This one seems to be broken. What do you mean it looks like? It's already broken. I've already drawn blood. Oh, then let's change it. But don't waste this little bit of blood. As they spoke, the two vampires removed the tools from the woman's body and began to suck her blood. Not many vampires were willing to work here, not even the low-level civilians. Those who were willing to work here were mostly because of the fast food, from time to time. It didn't look like it was breastfeeding. Instead, it looked like a vulture gnawing on a corpse. Bang, bang! After two soft thuds, the two vampires on the woman lost their strength and fell to the ground. Behind them, Anne's hands were still trembling slightly. A tranquilizer gun that can knock out elephants. She didn't even know when she took out the tranquilizer gun from the ring. She didn't even realize that she had shot out 2 tranquilizer bullets in succession. After the 2 vampires fell to the ground for a while, and rushed to the woman who was being bitten. Save. 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 Was there anything in the ring that could save people? She begged crazily. Whether it was the cloak, the gloves, or even the tranquilizer gun, they all seemed to be naturally thrown out from the ring according to her needs. Anything is fine. Clang. A small bottle fell to the ground, and was stunned. She picked up the bottle. She looked at the woman who was judged to be broken, and then at the bottle in her hand. Clenching her teeth, she pulled out the catheter from the woman's esophagus with force. Even so, the woman's eyes were still empty and there was no reaction at all, just like what the vampire said, she was already broken. And gritted her teeth and poured the liquid in the bottle into the woman's mouth. But the woman had lost the ability to move her mouth. Her lips couldn't close by themselves. Anne's hands trembled and covered the woman's mouth. Perhaps it was an instinct, she even hugged the woman's thin and weak body tightly. Don't die. Don't die. Do you hear me? Don't die. Drink it. Don't die. She kept whispering in the woman's ear. Drink it. And gradually exerted more strength with her hands and voice. Can you hear me? Don't die. Don't die. Come back to life. Come back to life. Gurgle. And didn't know if she was hallucinating. The woman in her arms seemed to move a little. Because of this, one of the gray gemstones in the ring on her finger gently flashed, but the flash quickly disappeared. The gray color of the gemstone was barely discernible to the naked eye, and a trace of gray faded away. And didn't notice the change of the gem on the ring. She let go of the woman and found that the woman's body gradually changed. First, the dull skin began to shine, then the lost muscles began to recover, even the teeth that were pulled out began to grow little by little, until the woman became a healthy person and her eyes regained their luster, and heaved a heavy sigh and murmured, Great, finally. God? The woman looked ahead blankly. Then, her eyes suddenly burst with a strong sense of expectation, and her voice became real. God, God, where are you? And was stunned. Then she remembered that she was still wearing the cloak that could make her invisible. She quickly untied the cloak and showed her original appearance. The woman was startled when she saw her appear out of thin air, and hurriedly said, "I'm not a god. I'm just a person who saved you. How do you feel now?" God. The woman was startled by Anne's appearance, but her eyes suddenly became fiery again. It was something that was even brighter than before. God, and couldn't help but be startled. Just as she was about to say something, she suddenly noticed a flash of light from the ring on her finger. After the flash of light, the gemstone became clearer and brighter. It was no longer gray. Although it was still far from being able to change color, it had really lit up. The traveling merchant said that as long as she saved people, she could light up the gem on the ring. The more people she saved, the faster the gem would light up, and looked at the woman in front of her who had come back to life and even recovered. However, she seemed to have some mental problems and mistook Anne for a god, and did not waste time explaining anything to this woman. Instead, she chose to save the other women in the room. First, she stopped the equipment in the room, and then she fiddled for a while to safely take out the tubes in the women's mouths. The magical potion kept falling from the ring, and began to use the potion to restore the women here. Later, she found that a little was enough to restore a woman. Speaking of which, were there so many potions on the table at that time? She felt that the things in the ring were much more than what the traveling merchant had displayed at that time. However, what the hell, and looked at those women who were saved and restored, and couldn't help but frown directly. The gem on the ring didn't light up because of this. It didn't even light up at all. Instead, the original brightness of the first gem completely dimmed down. This broken ring, was it an inferior product? Of course, this was just Anne's imagination. She had long admired the ability of this ring. She just couldn't figure out how to really light up the gem on the ring. God, at this moment, the first woman who was rescued by Anne suddenly spoke up beside her, and looked at her, and when she met her eyes, she was suddenly startled by the woman's gaze. This gaze was just like the first time the children in the farm learned that they were named by the vampire. Maybe it was a little different, but it didn't seem to be different. And subconsciously glanced at the gem on the ring. It seemed that the dim gem seemed to have brightened up a little, although it hadn't completely broken away from the gray. Was it because of this gaze? And was startled, and asked in a low voice, "What's your name?" "Amanda, my god," and shook her head and said, "Okay, Amanda, I'm really not a god. Like you and them, I'm also human. And I'm also a human born in the farm." No. Amanda suddenly pounced in front of Anne, raised her head and looked at her with great devotion. "You're my god. It's you who woke me up in the darkness. What I saw was light. You gave me light. You're my god." Along with Amanda's fanatical and even somewhat neurotic speech, the gem on the ring instantly lit up again. This time, the brightness directly made the gem completely break away from the gray level. Red, orange, yellow, light green. The first gray gem on the ring had finally turned into a light green color. There were a total of 10 gems. After turning light green, it was so bright. What the hell? Alexian felt a chill in her heart. Sensing the fanaticism in Amanda's eyes at this moment, she had a flash of inspiration and thought, not only do I have to save them from danger, but I also have to make them become like Amanda in order to truly light up the gem on the ring? And subconsciously looked around at the women who had been rescued and whose bodies had been repaired. However, they were still sitting on the chairs in a daze. In other words, I'm going to become a god in their hearts? She was shocked by her own thoughts and thought that it was because of her lingering paranoia, and shook her head. Although she subconsciously denied this idea, she vaguely felt that simply saving these women was not really saving. At least they had to recover their spirits. Then it would be counted as saving, right? But what method should I use to recover their spirits? And couldn't help but start to feel troubled. She looked at Amanda, who was still beside her. To be exact, was still kneeling on the ground, and scratched her head. Can you stand up first? I have some questions that I want to ask you. Yes. My God. Amanda slowly stood up, but lowered her head, looking very obedient. You mean, because you heard my voice? And thought for a while and asked, because you heard my voice, so? Well, because you woke up? Yes, my God. Amanda nodded. It was you who saved me from the abyss of despair, and gave me warmth and faith. And nodded and began to ponder. Voice. Stimulation by words? And thought for a while, and then began to walk to one of the women who had recovered but was still in a daze, and then began to speak in her ear. As she spoke, she observed the reaction of the gem on the ring, but no matter what she said, the woman in front of her had no reaction at all. As in spoke, she was even a little annoyed, waving her hand gently to touch the woman's cheek, but there was no reaction. She then tried to touch two other women, but still didn't get the desired effect, and sighed. It seemed that lighting up the first gem, and even reaching the brightness of light green, was really a coincidence. She shook her head and began to feel troubled again. This milk factory was just one of the places in the mating farm. There were two similar factories. There were other factories with other functions. But here, except for Amanda, the others couldn't move. Not to mention waking up these women's minds. How to take them away was a problem of the century. Can't you at least give me a hint, Mr. Itinerant Merchant? And smiled bitterly and muttered to herself. But at this moment, a scream suddenly sounded in this milk factory. It was Amanda's voice. It turned out that just as Anne was trying to wake up the other women, the two vampires who were unconscious after being shot by the tranquilizer gun had woken up. The two vampires who woke up instantly caught Amanda. Don't move. Who are you? Why are you here? The vampires stared at this time, and at the same time, they bared their fangs. Chapter 1397. They were vampires. They were demons, the source of all the pain. She should have killed them. No, at the very least, she should have tied these two vampires up completely from the beginning. She should have used a rope. Rope wouldn't work, she should have used an iron chain. 1 round. No, 2 rounds, 3 rounds. Or kill. If she could kill them. If she could kill them, Amanda wouldn't be held hostage, and she wouldn't be in danger. Why didn't she do that? Why didn't she do that? Why didn't she think of that? And felt like her heart was about to jump out of her chest, and her thoughts almost stopped. Cold sweat, her whole body was weak, and her legs were rooted to the ground. She didn't even dare to look into the eyes of these two vampires. She moved her eyes away, and her eyes met the eyes of the other women. These eyes seemed to have changed a little. They didn't seem to be dull and empty, instead, they became fearful of the two vampires in front of them, who only showed their sharp fangs and slightly sharpened eyes. Trembling. Fear began to spread from these women like a plague. They suddenly hugged their own bodies tightly, trembling, curling up. After curling up, they trembled even more violently, as if they were people who had been trapped in a dry well without seeing the light of day for a year, 3 years, 10 years, and suddenly saw the light of day at the mouth of the well. Fear. She was the same as them. Herself. She was actually the same as them, exactly the same as them. Even if she didn't suffer such torture in this factory, she was the same as them. Ever since all the beautiful memories were destroyed that day, ever since he left the dreamy farm for the first time, he saw the revolutionary army that was executed, and he occasionally saw the fate of the adults who weren't good enough in the farm. The horror of vampires had been deeply imprinted in his mind. Facing the few men from the inspection team who wanted to violate her, she could let out the most vicious curse. Facing David, who was also a human, she could also attack him from behind without hesitation. But when facing vampires, she didn't even subconsciously think about or destroy, or kill and damage. She couldn't summon the slightest courage to resist. Even if she had such thoughts, it was just something that drifted around the edges. On one hand, he wanted to walk out of this nightmare, but on the other hand, there was nothing he could do. One person couldn't do anything at all, right? Humph! It was a cold snort from one of the vampires. The speed of the vampires was as fast as ever, and knew that they were so fast, just like ghosts. It clenched its 5 fingers together, and its palm was like a sharp spike, stabbing toward her. Anne's pupils constricted abruptly. She thought of resisting. She felt that she should be able to resist. She thought of the ring on her hand. There were many useful things in it. But what should she use? Without time to think, she instinctively raised her arm, but the sharp pain had already begun to spread from her body. The vampire's thorn-like palm directly pierced through her abdomen. After twisting and pulling it out, and painfully covered the wound on her abdomen with both hands and fell to the ground. She thought that she must have opened her mouth, and opened it very wide, but why couldn't she make a sound of pain? Her throat seemed to have been blocked, and her entire body began to convulse. She fell to the ground, and could only look up and down. Blood dripped from the vampire's palm. It was her own blood. A little further away, Amanda suddenly sat on the ground, absent-minded. She collapsed. Suddenly, she held her head and screamed in grief. The vampire seemed to have said something. What did it say? She couldn't hear it. She felt that she couldn't even move her favorite, delusion. I have to leave like this. Since I became an adult, I don't know if this is a life or not. Her vision began to blur. It became dark, she couldn't see anything. As expected, she couldn't do anything by herself, right? If she had known, she wouldn't have used the tranquilizer gun. She would have used something that could kill them. Anything, as long as it could kill them. She didn't have a chance. I'm sorry, Amanda. I'm not a god. I'm just an incompetent human who's always better at talking than doing. If you could do it all over again, what would you do? Do it all over again? How could it be possible? Would you really plan to fight against fate instead of just thinking about it? Yes. Probably. Who was talking? It seemed to be his voice. Was it a hallucination before death or something else? Then, go one more time. He said so. But, one more time. What? She suddenly woke up, as if she had a long dream. Air rushed into her lungs, and then opened her eyes. The ground was still cold and sticky. It was the texture of his own blood that filled up all the gaps between his cheeks and the ground after his blood flowed out. Her abdomen no longer hurt, and even the wound had disappeared. She still had a bottom-up view, but the difference was that Amanda was now being held up by the neck by one of the vampires. You acted too fast. You should at least ask this woman what method she used to restore these women. How would I know it was so easy to kill them? But if you want to know, why don't you just ask this? You're really reckless. Where's the woman's body? They all looked at the place where Anne fell. There was only a pool of blood left on the ground. What happened? They fiercely looked at each other. Then, they felt as if there was a huge danger approaching. But before they could react, a loud sound instantly exploded in their ears. They saw that one of the vampire's head had exploded. It fell to the ground and became a headless corpse, twitching and then stopped moving. The lowest-level vampires couldn't survive for a short period of time and rely on replenishment like the high-level vampires in the patrol team. Even if their heads exploded, as long as their hearts were still there, they could still recover. It died just like that. The remaining vampire suddenly let go of Amanda and rushed somewhere in the factory. It intended to sound the alarm. Bang, bang, bang. 3 loud noises sounded in succession. The vampire's arms and left leg that rushed to the alarm station were directly broken after the noises. It seemed to be broken by an explosion. It fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Its distorted face was like a dying beast. It didn't even see where the enemy was. But it felt that the enemy was right in front of it. There was a slight heartbeat sound in front of it. Finally, it saw Anne again, the woman who was supposed to be dead because her body was pierced right from the start. just like a painter's painting, and appeared in the three-dimensional world little by little. She slowly lifted the cloak on her body and finally became three-dimensional. Her right hand was holding a strange firearm that looked like a gun in the past. There was still a trace of smoke coming out of it. Anne's cheeks were still stained with blood. It was her own blood, which dyed half of her face and half of her lips red. You. Why did you, and didn't speak? The gun was pointed at the seriously injured vampire at this time, and then she stepped back little by little. She stepped back to Amanda's side. Amanda's dazed eyes gradually regained color. She didn't have time to speak, and walked behind Amanda, grabbed her hand and gripped the gun in her hand. Both of them gripped the old gun at the same time. Aim, aim, she whispered in her ear, now I'm your god. With Amanda in tow, and pulled the trigger. Bam! On the ground, the dying vampire's chest was instantly blasted open by the bullet from the gun. It turned into a pile of flesh emitting a burnt smell. Phew! And exhaled deeply and looked at her abdomen subconsciously. If it weren't for the torn clothes and the intact skin, she wouldn't even believe that it had been penetrated. But now, and gently covered her abdomen. She could feel that it had really healed. But, when she inadvertently looked at the ring on her finger, she found that the light green gem had completely dimmed. The brightness seemed to have been consumed, and couldn't help but feel confused. Was it because of the consumption of the brightness that she was resurrected, or was there some other reason? And the voice she heard in the end, was it her own illusion or, she shook her head and shook these chaotic thoughts out of her mind for the time being. She turned to look at Amanda. At this moment, Amanda was still holding the gun in both hands. She sat on the ground, paralyzed, and even maintained the posture she had when she was shooting. Did you see that? And took a deep breath and said to Amanda, You killed a vampire, you did it. You did it with me. It wasn't as difficult as you imagined. Amanda reacted to Anne's words and raised her head subconsciously, and looked at her and smiled. You're much braver than I was just now. We're still alive. That's... Amanda's lips moved and she mumbled, That's the voice, my goddess, and felt a sudden warmth from the ring in her hand. The gem that had completely dimmed began to light up a little, but this time, it was only slightly red. This warmth seemed to be some kind of stimulation, and suddenly shivered and subconsciously looked at the other women except Amanda. She found that their gazes began to change. Stand up, and blurted out. She didn't even think about what she was going to say next. She just blurted out, Stand up. I'll give you weapons. Follow me. I'll take you out. She gritted her teeth and waved her hand with the ring. Instantly, dozens of weapons were thrown out from the ground. Pick them up and follow me. I'll take you out. Are the vampires scary? Scary. I didn't even have the courage to resist. So I died. I died once. Then I killed them. And there were 2 of them. So, stand up. Follow me, I'll take you out. Stand up. Stand up. Amanda stood up, holding the gun in her hand tightly, like a seedling breaking out of the soil. She stood up. Behind Amanda, a woman's gaze suddenly became clear. She stood up from the chair, but because she hadn't exercised for a long time, she fell to the ground after standing up. But she didn't give up. She struggled. Struggling hard. Amanda walked over and helped her up. God! A stronger warmth began to flow from the ring into Anne's body. She felt like she was wrapped in warm water. The reddish gem began to change colors. One woman after another stood up from the chair that had once swallowed their lives. God! And even heard many voices, like the inner thoughts of these women. Maybe it was just her imagination. But she could do it this time, right? It was no longer a delusion, but a real action. And looked at these women who stood up again and surrounded her. She smiled. Follow me? I'll take you out of here. God! That was their silent inner thoughts. Their faith in her. God! Great sound. Farm. Looking at the street of a farm, Boss Luo put his hand beside his ear, listening to what the wind blew. Once the flame appears it will keep burning, Luocio chuckled. In the beginning God appeared like this, Master? At this moment, Miss Maid's voice sounded in Boss Luo's ears. Miss Maid was still in the room of the villa, creating the background of the orcs after they entered the game world. She was writing about the evil dragon from the Far East who was besieged by the angry orcs. What's the matter? Luocio asked in his mind. Nothing, I suddenly felt a trace of divinity being born, but it's very weak. Miss Maid's voice was a little uncertain. Is it Master's work? It's an accident, but sometimes it's a pleasant surprise. Boss Luo smiled. I don't know if this surprise will last forever. I should go back after a while. Before Master comes back, I'll finish writing the background information of the orcs. Luocio smiled. The story of the evil dragon? A little bit. Miss Maid's voice sounded a little playful. Boss Luo smiled and then temporarily cut off the communication with Miss Maid. He looked at David and Meilu, who happened to arrive at one of the entrances of the sewer that led to Mating Farm. His eyes started to become expectant. I don't know if there are any more surprises. Chapter 1398. She turned her body and slowly opened her eyes. While feeling the softness of the mattress, she also saw Sister Long sitting on the chair beside the bed, looking at her with her chin resting on her hand. Sister Long, good morning. She yawned and greeted at the same time. Shinryu of Kelowna rolled his eyes. It's not dawn yet. Go back to sleep if you're sleepy. Well, okay. Luo Dance yawned and then turned her body in the quilt. It was so comfortable. She continued to sleep. She thought like this. As she thought about it, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She opened her eyes abruptly, then lifted the blanket and sat up. Sister Long. Shinryu of Kelowna sneered. You woke up this time? Yes. I woke up. Go back to sleep. Why didn't you sleep? The butterfly monster pursed her lips, shaking her head with cold sweat, but it seemed to be useless. She lowered her head and bumped into Long Shirua's arms, hugging her waist tightly, crying, I'm sorry, Sister Long, I don't know how I fell asleep. I clearly remember that I wanted to lead Sister Yu Yi away as you said, but I don't know why I suddenly fell asleep. Long Shirua looked at this butterfly monster angrily. God knew where she learned this trick. She raised her hand and wanted to knock on her head, but she didn't want to do it. Instead, she gently stroked her head. Shinryu of Kelowna said angrily, You read so many books, but you're not smart at all. Be more careful in the future. What kind of place is this? How can you fall asleep so easily? Well, although Luo Dance fell asleep because of herself, she didn't want to say it out. Shinryu's majesty as the head of the family should be reflected in this way. She had to rebuild the great image in Butterfly Monster's heart. Yes. Butterfly Monster nodded and looked up at Long Shirua. She blinked and asked, Sister Long, did you secretly find the boss to do something bad? Puff? In fact, there was no image to speak of. Kelowna's Shinryu's face was still full of words. The words written by Miss Maid were still there. Oh, I thought about it, Kelowna's Shinryu said indifferently. I don't think I can forgive you so easily. The old man said, You'll learn from the pain. The old man said that one would learn to speak after being hurt. It was unknown whether the old man was right. The little butterfly monster who was lying on the bed with her but up would definitely not want to experience what had just happened again. Beside her, Kelowna's Shinryu flicked her hair and said with arms akimbo, Well, get up, don't stay here. I feel like something happened. Luo Dance quickly got up and asked confusedly, Did something happen? Long Shirua shook her head, and a trace of doubt flashed in her eyes. I felt like something suddenly appeared, just a moment ago, something not so good, very similar to some guys. Some guys? Luo Dance blinked, feeling that Sister Long's expression was somewhat strange or dignified. Long Shirua said expressionlessly, Some guys who left, boring guys. Forget it, you won't know even if I tell you. I probably won't have a chance to meet them in the future. Luo Dance was well behaved because she would never ask such questions. She got up and rubbed the place that was ravaged, her head. Sister Long, what should we do now? Long Shiro murmured, I'm a bit worried about Hui Yao. I don't know what he is doing now. Luo Dance was stunned and then understood. Mr. Hui Yao said that he had left to deal with something alone for some time, but he hadn't come back yet. Mr. Hui Yao, can't you find this place? Kelowna's Shinryu rolled her eyes and said grumpily, Go and see the girl I brought back and see how she is now. The little butterfly monster nodded and trotted out of the room. Long Shirua opened the curtains of the room and looked outside. Although she was still concerned about Hui Yao. Well, should I ask Luo? Profiteer? Anyway, the information channel has been opened. If it's just a little inquiry, speaking of which, why didn't he respond now? Was it because he hadn't called out to her in his heart? Should she give it a try? Long Shirua looked at her reflection in the glass. She suddenly pulled the curtains. Go to hell. You make me feel like a man all the time. Shaking her head, Long Shirua patted her cheeks with both hands. As the first tower master, Hui Yao couldn't find anything in this inhuman space that could baffle him, except for that pair of master and servant. Therefore, compared to Hui Yao's delayed arrival, Long Shirua was actually more concerned about another thing, the thing that she and Luo Dance felt like something had appeared. What's the matter? Kelowna's Shinryu muttered to herself, Why do I feel that the path of incense god has appeared in this place? After a while, Kelowna's Shinryu couldn't hold it in anymore. She then cleared her throat and stared at the air for a while before swallowing her saliva. Hey! Well, it's a bit impolite. She cleared her throat again and lowered her voice. Are you there? Shouldn't I call your name first? Who are you calling like that? She cleared her throat again and coughed twice. Her voice was so sweet that it could drown people. Are you there? I have something to ask you. This time, even Kelowna's Shinryu was disgusted by herself and scratched her hair. Once Kelowna's Shinryu was irritated, she spoke in her mind with an unhappy voice. Telepathy. Profiteer. Tell me the information about Hui Yao. It's over. Long Shirua regretted it as soon as she roared this in her heart. She waited for a moment, wondering if Luochio didn't respond because he didn't like her attitude. She couldn't help but feel annoyed. However, a piece of information was suddenly injected into her mind. It was information about Hui Yao. According to the information, Hui Yao was not in any danger at this time. He was just doing something that was hard to come by. As for what kind of rare thing it was, the information did not mention it in detail. Long Shirua felt that if she wanted to know what kind of opportunity it was, she should be able to find it out by chance. However, she thought about it and decided not to. As the saying went, everyone has their own fate. She couldn't force it. Although she was only a disciple, she still hoped that Hui Yao could become more outstanding from the bottom of her heart. Speaking of which, Long Shirua licked her lips at this time. The so-called information channel is actually this kind of automatic mechanism. It wasn't always Boss Luo's real body that answered. It was just that there was a kind of mode where she would pay first and then pay after a period of time. In this case, Long Shirua blinked her eyes. Her heart suddenly jumped a few times. Then, she looked around guiltily. She quickly locked the door of the room to prevent a certain big-breasted but brainless butterfly from suddenly barging in. She still felt a little uneasy, so she consecutively set up more than 10 barriers around her. After that, Kelowna's Shinryu looked at the ceiling and glanced around. What kind of food does that guy like to eat? Does that guy really like short-haired girls? Foot size? It was as if she heard the voice of the mysterious information channel itself. It's not supposed to be used like this. David followed Meow Meow's footsteps and stopped at one of the sewers without much thrill. At this time, Meow Meow raised her palm slightly and signaled him not to stop. Meg Ming turned around and gestured for him to keep quiet. David understood and nodded. Then, he saw Meow Meow suddenly rushed out of the alley. David's pupils slightly contracted. Meow Meow Meow's agility was even faster than when he held the Tang Dao that he traded. What exactly did she sell in exchange for such an ability? David restrained himself and silently watched Meow Meow Meow's every move after rushing out of the alley. At this time, Meow 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 rushed towards a few patrolling inspectors. They were not patrolling guards. Perhaps the inspectors had also received the same order and were also searching for the vampire killer in the farm. Only one of them was a real vampire, while the other two were adult descendants of the ancients who had become inspectors. A male and a female. Flame. Black flame. David once again saw the magical power of Meow 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 Meow. The flame was silent like a flowing breeze. It didn't even have the slightest bit of heat, and it easily blew to the side of the inspectors. Although it didn't have any heat, after it attached itself to the vampire, it went crazy in an instant. It directly swallowed the vampire in an extremely terrifying speed. The intensity of the black flames that engulfed the vampire was so great that the two human inspectorate members at the side were instantly shocked to the point that their eyes turned dull. Only when the vampire was completely burned, leaving only some clothes and the vampire's original weapon on the ground, did the man and woman wake up with a start. Among them, the male member of the inspectorate took out something from his waist in a panic. It was something like a signal flare. He raised the signal flare with trembling hand. Just when he was about to pull the flare, Meow Meow had already rushed in front of him and hit the man's abdomen with her knee, knocking him down to the ground. After all, he was just an adult human who had submitted himself to her, and he hadn't even undergone any transformation. An ordinary person's body naturally couldn't withstand such a heavy blow. The man suddenly squatted down, while holding his abdomen in pain. The female inspector next to him screamed and pulled out the long sword at her waist in a panic. "If you don't want to end up like this vampire, shut up." At this time, Meow Meow waved her hand, and a black flame jumped directly in her palm. The man and woman of the inspector were so frightened that they hurriedly stopped all their voices. The aristocrat. No, the vampire was burned to ashes in front of their eyes just like that. Such a powerful vampire was killed so easily. The two of them didn't dare to resist. It was as if obedience was something that they were born with. Meow Meow saw the thing called slavery in the eyes of the two people. She sighed in her heart. How many people, after knowing the truth, can get rid of this thing that has been formed since the beginning of their lives? This was not simply something that had been formed since the birth of a child. This was something that had been passed down generation after generation in the farm for thousands of years. It borrowed the blood of humans from generation to generation, and like a certain gene, it was deeply embedded in the blood before the child was born. Just like how living things evolved with the change of environment, so that the later generations could better adapt to the changes of the new environment, just like how a great biologist's theory of evolution could be applied to the innate slavery of the descendants of the ancient species in the farm. At this time, David quickly walked to Vela's side. Although he didn't know why Meow Meow didn't directly kill the two inspectors, but since she had already subdued them, David didn't say anything. "First, tie these two people up, and bring them along." Meow Meow looked at David and said directly, "This is like an order." David was quite unhappy in his heart, but he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he nodded obediently. "I am the commander of the Revolutionary Army this time." He quickly tied up the two inspectors and even used cloth balls to stuff their mouth. He was very careful. David looked at Meow Meow and asked, "You plan to bring them along? But won't this cause trouble?" Meow Meow frowned and looked at David. "They are just like us, they are also humans. When did the Revolutionary Army learn to despise their own kind?" David's heart suddenly jumped, but his face was still expressionless. Instead, he looked like he was deep in thought. "No, if there is no way to truly defeat the vampires and liberate all of our kind, there is nothing we can do to change them." Looking at Meow Meow's attentive expression, David said slowly, "So what if we bring them along?" What can we do to persuade them to join us? But we don't know if they are as determined as us, if they have the same determination to save their own kind, so. David took a deep breath and said sincerely, I would rather they stay with the vampires, at least this way. At least they can still live even if their will is not strong enough. Meow Meow's gaze slowly changed, it seemed to be gentler. At this time, David laughed bitterly. Is this thinking of mine too naive? Meow Meow said, I don't plan to bring them along, but if we bring them along, they might be of use. Don't worry, I won't let you be in danger. That's not what I meant. David shook his head, and at the same time, he was secretly relieved. Chapter 1399. There was no sun or moon in the inhuman domain. But the transition between light and darkness was still as punctual as day and night. Busby had never seen the real moon. He was a vampire who had never left the inhuman domain, and went to the main world. Therefore, he didn't know what the real moon looked like. After hearing the description of the moon by the vampires who often traveled between the real world and the inhuman domain, Busby had once yearned for it. He flew above the farm, town, and looked up at the dark sky. The night sky without stars and moon was like a black cloth. In the inhuman domain, if there was no light, it would be absolute darkness. There was no such thing as moonlight or starlight, but on the other hand, any weak light on the ground would be very obvious. If there was enough light, there might be a galaxy on the ground. Who said that? He lowered his head and silently looked at the farm below. At the same time, the muscles on his back began to move slowly. A pair of new bat wings began to expand little by little like a flower bud. The new bat wings quickly turned from weak to strong. Then, with a strong flap, Busby's body rose up a little more. Then, he flipped over and glided, drawing a beautiful arc in the air, and falling into the farm. The killer, he found it. After this is over, should I take Mina to see the real world? He suddenly had this idea. Mai and David had successfully entered the sewer. From the beginning, the sewer was built for some unknown reason. Maybe it was because of the Torito clan's innate pursuit of aesthetics, but the sewer was very spacious and complicated. It was as complicated as a maze. The captured man and woman were blindfolded at this time, and their hands were tied. Then, they were dragged by a rope and staggered forward. Mai was at the back, waiting to see what the pair would do. David didn't talk to Mai too much here, although he was very eager to know what kind of deal Mai had made. He wanted to ask about it indirectly, and at the same time, he didn't want to tell Mai that he also had some magical things in his hands. At the same time, he didn't want to mention anything about the deal in front of the pair, so he could only keep silent. But silence didn't mean that David didn't intend to do anything. Speaking of which, if we had been able to use this sewer in the beginning, it might have been more advantageous for us. He turned around and looked at Mai. In fact, as the commander of this operation, he didn't even know about the existence of this huge sewer. As for Mai, she obviously didn't share this information. Mai, David, have you ever thought about why all of our companions were captured, and right when we were about to take action, such a coincidence? Suddenly, some of the conversations in the stable flashed through David's mind. The initial conclusion of the discussion was that the mysterious companion who acted as the helper in the farm might have betrayed them, resulting in the failure of the mission. But now that they thought about it, if there was no way to confirm the reliability of the secret helper in the farm, the leader would never have agreed to this mission. Throughout history, there had never been a problem with the receivers from different farms, so why did it have to be this time? Could it be that the problem was not caused by a spy but one of their own? Once he thought of this, David's breathing slowed down a little. Among so many people, who was the most likely to be the culprit? Mai? Did she really obtain this power because she made a deal, or did she obtain it from somewhere else? But if it was her, then there was no need for her to rescue them from the dungeon. David could only eliminate the possibility of Mai being the culprit. This time, there were a total of 4 people who escaped during the chaos. 2 of them died in the stable, so it shouldn't be her. The other 2 were May and Martin from the farm. May and Martin had a very good relationship. May seemed to have been traumatized by something, causing her personality to change drastically. While Martin was dead, David still didn't know what happened. Regarding the sewer, I have already told Ma Lu about it. May didn't think too much about it and explained directly. After she studied it, she didn't accept the suggestion of using the sewer. Ma Lu. David's eyes flashed with a strange light. Because of this name, he had a different look in his eyes. This was the woman who came to his aid when he was at his most desperate. Hey, are you okay? If you can't find a reason to live, why don't you try to live for me? Time is here. David took a deep breath and tossed away the messy thoughts in his mind. He suddenly couldn't find the reason why he was so desperate. In fact, he even had a vague feeling that it was funny that he was desperate. That's right. May nodded. Even though this sewer leads to everywhere and it is easy to get to every part of the farm, but on the other hand, the vampires are very strict with their inspection. So, this place is even more unsuitable for hiding and moving around. David didn't say anything because he saw a special device that looked like a patrol sign. In this kind of enclosed place, it was too easy to make noise when moving around. But if that was the case, David had a feeling that the vampires would be able to find this place much faster. It was impossible that they didn't realize that the people they wanted to capture could be hiding in this complicated underground maze. Wait for me here. Keep an eye on these 2 people. May suddenly said, Remember, don't leave. Unless there are vampires nearby, I'll be back soon. Where are you going? David couldn't help but frown. But May didn't respond. She seemed to be in a hurry. Soon, she climbed up the stairs from the side. David frowned again. Perhaps he could follow her quietly and see what she was going to do. But he couldn't be sure if May had any other sensing ability. David was silent for a moment and then suddenly set his eyes on the 2 people in front of him. He turned his eyes and walked to the man and asked in a low voice, What's your name? He took out the cloth from the man's mouth. Roy. The man said his name with a trembling voice. David glanced sideways at this moment and suddenly lowered his voice. Take off your clothes, right now. Roy's body suddenly stiffened. He vaguely knew what the guy who held him hostage was planning. However, under the threat of David's sharp tang sword on his neck, he had no choice but to do as he was told. May quickly climbed out of the manhole. She had to do this. The black flame burning on her cheeks was like a hungry beast that couldn't be satisfied no matter what. It began to want to devour the target of revenge. And it was getting stronger and stronger. The faster the power gained, the bigger the flaw. This black flame perfectly explained this saying. May took a deep breath of the cold wind on the street. She felt the excitement of the black flame in her body. In front of her, there were a lot of things that it wanted to devour, those vampires. At this moment, what appeared before May's eyes was a rather magnificent palace building. This building couldn't help but evoke some unpleasant memories in May. She, as a kind of character setting in the farm, used to live in this building with several boys and girls of the same type. The black flame on her cheeks suddenly became stronger. May directly walked into the palace building. The inside was brightly lit with shadows swaying. It seemed that there were many vampires here. And they were powerful vampires. It seemed that those patrol members couldn't compare with them. For May, this should be a more dangerous place. But driven by the black flame, she seemed to be the tool of revenge. Who? The 2 vampires guarding the entrance immediately shouted for them to stop, but what responded to them was a strange and inexorable black flame. The black flame directly shot into their mouths, and then directly entered their bodies, devouring them from the inside out. May felt the power of the black flame in her body suddenly became stronger, and her eyes naturally flashed with murderous light. What she didn't know was that this palace was actually the temporary residence of the entire Toreador clan's upper nobles. In the palace, a marquis who was looking forward to the appearance of the vampire killer didn't know what kind of power this vampire killer had. Inside the palace, the upper nobles were still discussing whether they should wake up the Grand Duke to punish Baseby and Balegan. How about a plate of blood salad first? A noble who was keen on eating made a suggestion, and soon, most of the nobles agreed. Oh, go and open my private freezer. A forthright noble stood up and spread out his hands. I'd like to present a precious gift to my beloved friends. His words quickly gathered the attention of most of the nobles. He smiled and said, I think you will like the taste of my collection. They are all the things that were frozen on Necrop's 18th birthday. Their beliefs have collapsed, and their blood has become very chaotic. But I have kept it in cold storage. As long as they are slightly thawed, you will be able to taste the mixture of chaos and purity. I heard that it feels like a human drinking a bottle of strong alcohol. I don't know how alcohol tastes to humans, but I can tell you that this feeling is really wonderful. His speech quickly received a warm applause. The nobles seemed to have forgotten the original topic and began to discuss the benefits of this frozen food. Their lives had always been here. They were never in tune and there was no sense of tension. They had completely become trash that only knew how to enjoy. Marquis Gouda coldly looked at most of the nobles around him. Even if they didn't participate in the discussion, they were doing other things. They didn't care about Marquis Gouda's suggestion to wake up the Grand Duke. Marquis Gouda sneered and silently counted the time in his heart, waiting for the surprise, arranged by his confidant, to arrive. It should be about time, right? To give these trash that only knew how to enjoy stimulation. This palace looked very strange. What made May puzzled was that she didn't encounter any patrolling personnel or fixed guards along the way. Yes, there were all these, but the problem was, whether it was patrolling vampires or standing guard vampires, there were very few of them. Was it because they were all transferred to capture her? But no matter what, it greatly facilitated her actions. She didn't even need to make a big fuss, and she could easily use the flame to devour these isolated vampires. She strengthened the power of the flame bit by bit. She didn't stop all the way, and the power of the black flame had been strengthened to far beyond the previous fierce battle in the square. But it still didn't have any intention of stopping. It only slightly restrained the feeling of hunger that passed to her. Suddenly, a group of vampires dressed in the uniforms of the patrol team came in unison. This group of vampires wore the uniforms of the patrol team. Their faces were cold, and their movements were neat. They strode forward aggressively. But what made May puzzled was that this group of patrolling guards didn't seem to be coming for her. But she could go straight for them. If she could successfully devour this group of guards completely, May had a vague feeling that the black flame in her body seemed to have some new changes. She quietly followed like a ghost. At this time, the black flame covered her body with a layer of black gauze-like substance, isolating the sound of her movements and even the sound of her breathing. She was a true ghost. Roy's stomach was churning. After being forced to take off the uniform of the inspection team, he was forced by David to put on the stinky clothes that David took off. David changed into Roy's uniform at this time and even replaced his tang sword with the weapon of the inspection team, hanging it on his waist openly. He looked at his current attire with satisfaction, but at this moment, the sound of footsteps faintly came from the sewer. David's eyes suddenly narrowed. May said to wait here for her to come back, but she hasn't come back yet. Then, Chapter 1400. David was not the only one who heard the sound. Apparently, Roy and another female member of the inspection team also heard the approaching sound at this moment. The two people who were being held hostage were obviously looking for an opportunity to send out a distress signal. However, they did not dare to move because they were currently being held hostage. As the 6 pairs of eyes met, David could clearly hear the breathing of the two men gradually becoming heavier. At this moment, Roy suddenly quivered. He opened his mouth as if he was about to shout. David's pupils shrank. Without any hesitation, he pounced directly on Roy. He did not choose to use any knife because blood would only make the vampire discover him earlier. He just used his arm to strangle Roy's neck while covering his mouth with his palm and exerting his strength crazily. Roy's legs kept kicking on the ground, and his face became extremely ugly due to suffocation. It was his last struggle before death. David's gaze was fierce at this moment. While strangling Roy's neck, his eyes were only staring at the passage ahead. He even kept making shoo, shoo in Roy's ear, telling him to be quiet. Shoo. Luo-yi finally stopped moving, and his legs stopped moving. There was no longer any resistance, and his body was completely relaxed, soft. But David did not let go and still held him tightly. It was not until a while later that he was sure Roy was really not breathing that he let go of his arm. On the side, the female member of the inspection team was so scared that she did not dare to move. At the same time, the footsteps in the distance began to become clearer. David suddenly stood up and pulled out the tang sword at his waist. The sharp tip of the sword gently poked the throat of the female member of the inspection team. Almost at the same time, a voice came from the sewer passage. "There seems to be something over there. Go and take a look." Hearing the voice, the female member of the inspection team suddenly widened her eyes. She could feel the sharpness of the tip of the sword at her throat, but her mouth was gagged, and she could not say anything for help. Her heart was about to jump out. She even saw the madness in David's eyes. Finally, David raised the tang sword in his hand and swung it down at an extremely fast speed. 2 guards from the patrol team were patrolling the area. When they heard the sound, they immediately sped up. However, when they suddenly smelled the smell of blood, they spread their wings and began to shuttle through the sewers. It didn't take long for the 2 vampires to arrive at the place where the bloody smell came from. Here, they saw a corpse lying on the edge of the water tank. Blood had already flowed into the water tank, and half of the corpse's body had also entered the water tank. Beside him was a man and a woman from the inspectorate team. The woman was currently lying in the arms of the man, seemingly unconscious. "What happened here?" One of the patrolling guards frowned. Hearing this, the male member of the inspection team raised his head. His expression was so respectful that it was almost humble. "Masters, we received a notice saying that we were searching for a criminal. Then, we were arranged to go to the sewers. This person, we met him here. He seems to be a fugitive hiding here." As he spoke, he observed the expressions of the 2 vampires. He didn't let himself become completely calm, but with a trace of awe and fear. Those who knew the truth would always feel fear when facing vampires. Fear. Only fear would prevent vampires from feeling discordant. "Did you kill him?" the other vampire asked indifferently. He nodded, "Yes, because he was resisting and sneakily attacked. My companion was hit because of this. I had no choice but to stop when I was entangled. I'm really sorry." The vampire walked to the side of the corpse and flipped it over with a weapon. He casually glanced at the dirty face of the corpse. The corpse's heart was constantly bleeding, and it was still fresh. But for this, the 2 vampires didn't have any interest, because the corpse was too dirty to arouse their appetite. This should be one of the people of the Revolutionary Army who escaped in the chaos in the first half of the night. They quickly made a judgment: it's fine if he's dead. Anyway, there's nothing to pity. What's your name?" He quickly said, "Masters, my name is Luo-yi. I'm the 7th team of the inspection team." "Enough. Say no more." Before Roy finished his words, he was directly interrupted. The 2 guards of the patrol team were obviously not interested in knowing the origin of this human who didn't resist after knowing the truth, but chose to submit to slavery. The vampire who interrupted Roy's words said directly at this time, "You take this woman and this corpse back immediately. Once we confirm the identity of this corpse, let's do what we need to do." Roy quickly nodded and said yes. Then he quickly stood up, came to the corpse, grabbed the clothes of the corpse, and began to drag it. Facing the stench of the corpse's clothes, Roy even made a retching action at this moment, but he braced himself and had to do it. He quickly dragged the corpse out of the sink under the gaze of the two vampires, then quickly carried the fainted woman on his back and said humbly, "I'll take the corpse back now, masters. Any other messages, do you want me to bring back?" "No, let's go," a vampire said casually. The other vampire was looking around the sewer, seemingly trying to discern something. Roy nodded silently at this moment, then he carried the woman on his back and dragged the corpse, struggling to leave from their sight. "Wait a minute." But after walking for a few meters, the vampire's voice sounded again. Roy's pupils constricted slightly, but he did not hesitate at all. He quickly turned around and showed a flattering expression. "Is there anything else, my lords?" One of the vampires suddenly threw out something. It was a silver badge with a number engraved on it. This silver badge rolled to Roy's feet. He didn't know what it was for a while, but he quickly picked it up. The vampire who threw the badge said indifferently, "Next time you go to the blood station to donate blood, show this to the station head. The station head will know to give you more rewards. Take it as a reward for killing the fugitive this time." Even if they became members of the inspection team, they still had the obligation to provide blood to the clan regularly. After all, they were still descendants of the ancients, and their blood was much cleaner than that of humans in this world. The adult ancients' descendants were just no longer welcomed by the superior nobles, but they were still very expensive food for the low-level vampires in the clan. Roy hurriedly held the silver badge in his hand gratefully and almost knelt down to kowtow. "Thank you, master. Thank you, master. Thank you, master." "Okay, get out." The vampire waved his hand. He had seen too many of the human beings in the inspection team groveling in daily life. Roy picked up the corpse's clothes again, carried the woman on his back, and slowly walked out of the sight of the two vampires. He didn't walk too fast to avoid arousing the suspicion of the two vampires. It wasn't until he vaguely heard some of the conversation between the two vampires and finally heard them leave that he continued to walk for a distance before finally stopping. Letting go of the corpse, Roy, David threw the woman on his back directly to the ground. "I know you're awake, stop pretending." David coldly stared at the woman lying motionless on the ground. But the woman still didn't move. David sneered and casually pressed the scabbard against the woman's cheek. Then, he pried open her mouth. The woman hurriedly opened her eyes and begged for mercy. "When did you wake up?" David asked directly. The woman didn't dare to hesitate and quickly said, "Not long ago." David glanced at her and suddenly said, "Not long ago? Was it when the two vampires were still there? Why didn't you ask for help? You clearly had a chance to escape from danger, and even let the vampires catch me." "Yes, that's right." Facing David's scabbard on her cheek, the woman was still afraid, and her voice trembled slightly. But I can't be sure if you would hurt me first even if I exposed you. It's too dangerous." David said indifferently, "Then you can be sure that I won't hurt you after I deceive them?" At the same time, he glanced at the corpse on the ground. The corpse was the real Roy. His meaning was very clear. Since he could kill Roy, he could naturally kill her. The same trick can't be used twice. The woman's voice was still very low, like a student facing the teacher's question in class but was not confident. Her voice still had a trace of fava beans in it. "And even if you do it again, you killing me won't help." David didn't speak, just snorted softly. The woman raised her head. At this time, there were no restraints on her body, and she completely had the ability to resist, but she chose not to move. "Actually, I'm quite familiar with the environment of the farm. What do you want to say?" David squatted down and looked straight into her eyes. The woman swallowed her saliva. "I want to escape from this place." "You want to?" David couldn't help but frown. The woman quickly nodded. "You should be from the Revolutionary Army, right? Although the clan has always banned the news of the Revolutionary Army from spreading, we have heard about it more or less. Rumor has it that you opened up a shelter for humans in the inhuman territory, where humans can live normally just like us in the past. You want to go? I want to go, the woman said urgently. I've always wanted to go. I've even been looking for an opportunity. Here, the farm. I'm afraid we can't stay any longer. The nobles. I heard that they plan to remove the inspection team, and they won't even use adults after submitting to them in the future. After the children in the farm reach adulthood, all of them will be sent directly to the mating farm. And we may be sent directly to the slaughterhouse. Because I heard that the harvest of the major farms is not very good these years, the clans have to start to save some unnecessary expenses and to maximize the exploitation. David sneered. The woman lowered her head sadly and didn't deny it. More or less like her, she sold everything she could after reaching adulthood and finally became a slave of the vampire. Although she became a slave and didn't need to be sent to the farm with other functions, she still could only let the vampire dominate her life. You follow me, aren't you afraid that I will suddenly kill you on the way? David asked suddenly. The woman gritted her teeth and said, You won't. If I have value, you won't. Because I know that you don't have justice on the surface. You are a selfish and cold guy. As long as there is benefit, you won't refuse. What did you say? David looked at her expressionlessly. He was really expressionless. The woman said quickly, You killed Roy, didn't you? What can this prove? David sneered. The woman said, But you didn't use such a tone in front of that woman. You said those beautiful words in front of her. Did you forget it so quickly? But I heard it, Roy also heard it. The difference is that Roy is already dead after you said those beautiful words. David looked at her without saying a word. His palm pressed on the handle of the tang saber, and his fingers gently tapped. The woman's breathing began to become heavier, obviously more and more nervous. Suddenly, You have no value. David said indifferently, This is what you said? The same trick, it's not good to use it a second time. The woman quickly said, I know your plan. You want to sneak into the mating farm, through the sewers and wait until dawn to find a chance to leave, right? But I can tell you with certainty that there are nobles in the channel to enter the mating farm. Do you think they didn't think that there will be children of the farm? Or people like us who will secretly use this sewers? David himself also considered this problem. Perhaps the leader of the Revolutionary Army didn't accept my suggestion on the use of the sewers because of this consideration. Can I pass through with you? The woman hurriedly said, At least I have a pass. I don't need to go through the sewers, but I can pass through the checkpoint openly. So you have a pass on you? David smiled. The woman's face slightly changed, but she was still calm. Even if you have a pass, if you encounter any special situation on the road, do you have the confidence to deal with it? You have to remember, you are not the real Roy. But I have lived here for a long time. I can even call out the name of the guard at the checkpoint. You will need me. Are you not afraid that I will suddenly give up on you? David said indifferently, You know, we don't have much confidence to leave safely. If you follow us, the possibility of failure will be higher. But on the contrary, if you stay, you can still live for a while. Maybe the vampires will suddenly change their mind and not withdraw you guys who have surrendered. The woman looked at David at this time and smiled. You are saying such nice words again, aren't you? David suddenly chuckled, took back the tang sword, and said indifferently, What is your name? Renas. Remember, David said expressionlessly, As long as you have any intention to go behind me, I will not hesitate. Woman. Renas felt the ruthlessness in David's eyes and nodded subconsciously. Chapter 1401. Farm, mating farm and the more secretive slaughterhouse were separated by a huge wall. The high wall was not a difficult obstacle for vampires, but for humans, it was an insurmountable gap. The people in the farm did not immediately know what happened on the other side of the high wall, and the same went for the other side. However, the inspectorate team, who was stationed in the high wall and monitoring the different farms, knew what happened on both sides immediately. Inside the high wall, in the office of the inspectorate team, who was facing the withdrawal of the inspectorate team, who had the title of Baron, was frowning. Managing the farm was a position with great wealth. For vampires, only a large number of ancient pureblood could be counted as real wealth. Obviously, the inspectorate team did not want to lose this position no matter what. Even if he was promoted to a superior noble, he did not want to leave the farm. It's just the death of a human housemaster, and they made such a big fuss about it. Could it be that the matter of me secretly selling pureblood has been discovered? The inspectorate team paced back and forth in his office. Even though the outside world was in an uproar because of the vampire killer, he did not pay much attention to it. The inspectorate team, who was worrying about his power, received an emergency notice from the mating farm on the other side of the high wall. His face instantly turned ugly. The notice said that the mating farm had been taken over by the human livestock, and almost half of the area had fallen. Moreover, the human livestock had a large number of weapons in their hands that could fight against vampires, even the most hated silver nitrate. The inspectorate team thought that he had heard it wrong, and that it was a joke played by some stupid subordinate. However, when he quickly walked to the direction of the mating farm, what he saw was a spreading fire. Different from the farm, which was a town, the mating farm was a complete factory structure. A large number of factories were engulfed by the fire. Amidst the chaos, vampires were constantly shot down from the sky. The inspector-governor was drenched in cold sweat as he watched. He was already facing the crisis of being dismissed. If something were to happen to the mating farm at this moment, it would have already happened, and it would be a big deal. The inspectorate team felt that his position was completely gone. At this time, the inspectorate team angrily grabbed a monocular from his subordinate and directly scanned the mating farm below. A group of females and mutated humans, who should have been locked in various facilities to cultivate the next generation, were now brandishing weapons obtained from who knows where, forming a violent army. They actually suppressed the vampires, who were originally stronger, and forced them to retreat step by step. They even had to hide in a warehouse, not daring to come out. God knows where these females and breeders got these weapons that could cause such damage to vampires. The inspectorate team did not want to think about it at this time. What he thought was thinking was, this is simply a great humiliation. We were actually forced to hide by these domesticated animals. For thousands of years, the relationship between slavery and being enslaved had long been ingrained in the vampires' minds, but one day these slaves had the power to resist. Governor, not good. They had breached another place. The production farm was breached. We don't have enough manpower. Request for backup. Ah! The inspectorate team's face became more and more ugly. There were actually not many vampires in the inspectorate team. Most of them were naturalized adult humans. But for the convenience of management, these naturalized adult humans were not given any power. Facing the weapons that could kill vampires, they were even more powerless to fight back. These guys can't get so many weapons for no reason. The inspectorate team muttered, there must be someone commanding these humans. We must find out as soon as possible. Also, go and inform the patrol team immediately and ask them to send some people over. In the end, the inspectorate team was like the militia, while the patrol team members were the elite troops of the clan. The inspectorate team sighed at this time. At this time, the dereliction of duty was already confirmed. The key was to see how much he could save to make up for his mistake. Why did they have to rebel? The inspectorate team coldly snorted. It's not good to be domesticated animals. Why did they have to seek death? Someone, bring me my armor. The subordinates quickly nodded and then quickly left. At this moment the Inspector General lowered his head and muttered to himself, as if he had made a decision. He hurriedly waved his hand to summon a messenger. Then, he quickly wrote down a message before having the messenger send it out. After a while, the subordinate sent the inspectorate team's armor over. At this time, the inspectorate team coldly said, "Pass down the order." Facing the resisting animals, except for those who are pregnant, it's not a problem to kill a few more males and females. Especially males. Anyway, there will be a batch of adults sent here soon. We have as many seeds as we want. Let these animals know the consequences of resistance. Yes. The development of the situation was completely beyond Anne's imagination. At this time, even delusion couldn't save her brain from being bombarded by the situation in front of her. Who the hell knew what had happened? And couldn't help but recall what she had done in this short period of time. At the beginning, after rescuing a batch of women from Amanda, she immediately went to attack the milk factory next to it. Because she had experienced it once, and the milk factory itself wasn't an important facility of the mating farm. The defense force was very weak. After easily killing the 2 vampires who were collecting milk, the original team of dozens of people instantly broke through to 3-digit. Then, like a snowball, it started rolling down from the top of the mountain. It didn't stop at all, and it was extremely fast. Milk factory, seed factory, pregnancy area. Milk factory. And just mechanically took out batch after batch of weapons from the ring and handed them to the newly rescued humans. What made an even more puzzled was that the gems in the ring on her finger were crazily lighting up. 5 gems per kilogram were completely lit up. Even the 6th gem was lit up to blue. Just a little bit more and it would be the final purple gem. Although the merchant said that the more people she saved, the faster the ring would light up. But later, and found that it wasn't simply saving the people here that could truly light up the ring. She still needed to wake them up, let them regain hope, and let them take up weapons to fight back. The problem was, when she was in the first milk factory, and remembered that she went through a lot of difficulties and even died once before she could wake the dozens of women up. But now, she didn't do anything at all. She really didn't do anything, except to hand out weapons to the newly rescued humans. Goddessin. Just as Anne began to involuntarily let her imagination run wild, Amanda, who had changed into a military uniform, quickly walked over with a new batch of people in front of Anne. This time, it was a large group of pregnant women, and couldn't help but blink. They had already fought to the milk factory? She looked at the group of pregnant women in front of her in surprise. It seemed that Amanda wanted her to hand out weapons to these pregnant women? Speaking of Amanda, Anne really couldn't see through her. Ever since she left the milk factory, Amanda seemed to have been possessed. From the moment they captured the second factory until now, Amanda had been the one in charge of almost everything. She couldn't help but wonder if the businessman had entrusted the task to the wrong person. Actually, it would have been better for Amanda to complete the task. She was really just a salted fish. And scratched her head and asked, "Amanda, did you say anything to them?" Amanda's whole body was pressed to the ground. "Goddessin, I've already told them your greatness. You've successfully sprinkled your brilliance into the darkness that swallowed them. From now on, they will be like me, and will treat Lady Goddessin as their own." "Yes, I see." Anne's neck was a little stiff as she nodded. She felt that what was happening in front of her was very similar to the content of a book she had read in the library before, something like a secret cult. She looked at the pregnant women with big bellies. God knew what Amanda had instilled in them before coming here. Although her gaze didn't feel as passionate as when Amanda looked at her, it still felt like it was burning, and couldn't help but cough lightly. She really couldn't let the pregnant women join the battle, so she slowly said, "Amanda, can you arrange people to protect them? They're not suitable for fighting." "I understand, Goddessin. Lady Goddessin," Amanda said seriously, "I've already made up my mind. This time, I'm just bringing them to see Goddessin. Let them feel your brilliance. What brilliance do I have? The place behind me has been burned red by your fire, yes. I see. And still nodded. Then, who knew what to say? She didn't know what to say, so she simply cleared her throat and said, Amanda, so far we've saved many of our companions. What do you plan to do next? Amanda raised her head and said directly, We have got us in. We have weapons more powerful than these bloodthirsty vampires. So, I think that not only should we liberate the remaining areas and the deeper slaughterhouse, but we should also conquer the high wall. Conquering the high wall was equivalent to directly facing the vampires in the farm town. Those were the elites of the clans, and the soldiers of the inspection team couldn't compare to them at all. Although the ring on her hand was magical, and didn't think that with this ring alone, she could overthrow the Toredo clan's 1,000-year rule. What after conquering the high wall? Liberate the farm, Amanda said seriously. Liberate the whole Toredo clan's companions. Finally, destroy the Toredo clan. And couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. She subconsciously said, Amanda, do you really think you can defeat the Toredo clan? Amanda's face was full of enthusiasm at this time. Yes, because we have got us in. Under your brilliance, we're invincible. The fire behind me was really set by you guys. Or, after all the rings are lit up, I'll sneak away secretly, at this time, a man with a weapon, and didn't remember when she had armed this man. She couldn't even remember his name anyway. What a joke. She couldn't even count how many people she had saved. It had always been Amanda's plan. Not good. Not good. The man who rushed in was full of panic at this time. Amanda quickly stood up and shouted, In front of the goddess, be quiet. The man's face was full of shame, and then he knelt on the ground, his body trembling slightly as he said, Goddess. Many of our companions were injured or died tragically. The governor of the inspection team personally took action. The weapons you gave us can't deal with it at all. And was shocked. As a person who was a candidate for a dormitory after naturalization, she had lived in the Go farm for a long time and naturally had seen the governor of the inspection team from afar several times. She more or less knew how terrifying this governor was. I can't afford to offend him, I'll sneak away. Unexpectedly, Amanda snorted and said, What are you afraid of? We have the goddess in here. It's just a governor, how dare you make a fuss about nothing? How arrogant is this guy? And couldn't help but swallow quietly. She felt like crying but had no tears. She knew that she had a conscience. After dying once, she knew that her heart was cursed with cowardice, so when she killed the 2 vampires, she became tough. But it was impossible to be tough all the time. After all, creatures like humans were the most courageous when they were hot-headed. Once they calmed down, they would become timid. Amanda, I think, and thought about it and felt that she had to correct Amanda's fanaticism. Goddess. Unexpectedly, Amanda suddenly shouted, scaring and so much that she almost jumped up. What is it? Amanda knelt down on one knee and said, Goddess in. I request to fight the governor of the inspection team. Goddess, please give me the invincible holy light. It's over. Even if Amanda didn't mention it and could more or less guess what kind of character setting this guy used to grow up. Goddess, please give me the light of victory? Amanda shouted again at this time. That's why I'm saying that the flames behind me are really just the flames that you guys created by setting fires everywhere. Unexpectedly, the ring on her finger shone brightly and then went into Amanda's body. Bathed in this radiance, Amanda's essence, energy, and spirit seemed to have been raised by several levels. This light didn't fade for a long time, and didn't seem to want to fade away. What's going on? And couldn't help but look at the ring on her finger in shock. The 6th gem's brightness directly reverted to its original gray color. But immediately, the gray began to light up again and turned back to red. Chapter 1402. Unlike most of the seductive bitches in the Tory-Do clan who pursued beauty, the governor of the inspection unit had a rough appearance. Even the weapon it used was a spiked mace with spikes hanging all over it. After putting on the armor, the governor-general, who was already quite muscular, suddenly turned into an iron tower. Facing the humans who were holding silver nitrate weapons that could kill vampires, the governor-general swung his spiked club as if he was in a place where no one could stop him. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Facing this undefeatable and terrifying guy, the descendants of the ancients who had just been liberated from their hellish life suddenly became fearful. Could this kind of resistance really resist the fate of being enslaved? The courage that they had just awakened suddenly became ridiculously weak. In just a moment, the originally imposing formation was suddenly broken by the governor. Just a bunch of cowards, just a bunch of cowards. Raising the mace in his hand, the governor's voice spread all around. We are your masters. Remember, this is the result of your resistance. The mace picked up a woman who couldn't move due to fear, raised high, and then slammed hard on the ground. This woman was about to be smashed into meat paste. At this moment, a figure bathed in light quickly rushed over and caught the woman firmly. Amanda, who had volunteered to fight, had arrived. Feeling that Amanda's aura was completely different from the rest of the resistance, the governor of the inspection unit frowned slightly and sneered. You're the one who hid behind and commanded these animals to resist, right? Amanda ignored the governor's question and put the woman down. Then, she patted the woman's shoulder and said seriously, "Thank you for your hard work. The goddess has seen your bravery. Don't be afraid, and there's no need to be afraid because the goddess has always been with us." Amanda's words seemed to have some kind of incredible power. The woman who was trembling in fear immediately calmed down, and her eyes gradually became firm again. "Go back to your companions first." "I know." After that, Amanda looked directly at the governor who was behind the high wall without fear. To all the humans in the farm, perhaps the fear that this governor brought to them was even greater than those high and mighty vampire nobles. Because this guy in front of him had been ruling over all the farms in the clan all this while. But there was no need to be afraid. Avatar slowly exhaled. He raised the gun in his hand and pointed it at the governor. He calmly said, "Today I will kill you." Although he did not know why the woman was glowing, the governor did not sense any danger from her at all. The governor-general spread his huge bat wings and instantly appeared in front of Avatar. He swung his mace down so quickly that Avatar could only raise his hands to block the attack. The sharp spikes on the mace pierced into Amanda's arm. At the same time, the heavy blow caused her knees to bend, and she fell to her knees. "I thought there was something special about it." The governor laughed coldly. "So that's all you have?" At this moment, all the gazes on the battlefield were focused on Amanda. The people who had escaped all raised their voices, and seemed to be beginning to become unstable again. In the distance, Anne, who was surrounded by a group of people who were holding all kinds of weapons to protect her, saw this scene, and her heart almost jumped out of her chest. She gritted her teeth and was about to do something when suddenly, a powerful and dazzling light burst out from Amanda again. The brightness of the 6th gem on the ring instantly dropped to 0. Even the brightness of the 5th gem turned back to gray. Then, the brightness of the 4th gem dropped to 0. The 3rd one, when it was almost gray in color, it finally stopped, and did not have time to feel sorry for this, because at this time, Amanda had actually raised the governor's mace. She actually had the upper hand in the fight with the governor. How was this possible? The governor was shocked. He only felt that this woman who could easily smash to death suddenly seemed to have some kind of divine power. At this moment, Avatar let out a low roar and grabbed the mace with both hands. She actually snatched the mace from the governor's hands. Avatar, who had snatched the mace, took advantage of the governor's moment of shock to use the mace that was even bigger than her as a weapon and viciously smashed it towards the governor. Clang! Clang! The sound of metal colliding with metal was so loud that it hurt the eardrums. At the same time, it also made the governor see stars. However, Avatar was becoming more and more powerful, as if she did not know fatigue. She swung the huge mace faster and faster, and her blows became more and more vicious. At this time, the governor did not have any strength to resist at all. This mace was made of a special metal. Putting aside its weight, just its hardness alone had already surpassed the armor on his body. At this moment, the armor was being smashed by the mace. The governor's limbs were even being twisted because of the armor's deformation. However, Avatar did not have any intention of stopping. Finally, under the gaze of the many vampires from the inspection team, the governor in the high wall let out the first painful howl. The powerful governor was being beaten by a human to the point that he could only howl in pain. This scene made the few vampires in the inspection team stunned. Clang! Another terrifying blow. After the blow, the mace in Avatar's hand was directly broken. At the same time, the governor's limbs and even his body were severely twisted. He fell to the ground and blood splattered everywhere, almost dyeing half of Avatar's clothes red. However, thanks to the vampire's strong vitality, the heavily injured governor did not die. His eyes were still moving, as if he was looking for a chance to counterattack. However, Avatar slowly took out her gun and pointed it at the governor's heart. This is the final punishment. The bullet roared out and the ground trembled slightly. After the violent explosion, a deformed helmet soared high into the sky, and then fell. The helmet rolled on the ground until it reached the feet of a stiff vampire. At the center of everyone's attention, a figure slowly walked out of the fire. Avatar. At this moment, not only was there no injury on her body, but the radiance on her body was even stronger. Her hand was still holding the governor's head. Avatar casually threw the governor's head on the ground and shot out the gun again. This time, the power of the gun was much weaker, but it directly blew up the head. After doing all this, Avatar once again raised the gun in his hand and pointed it at one of the vampires in the air. Now I will punish you. Bang! The gun shot out a terrifying red light, instantly engulfing the vampire, and burning it. In the blink of an eye, the vampire's body was charred black and fell to the ground from a high place. After falling to the ground, it twitched and howled crazily. It seemed that it would not survive. After the deathly silence, there were wild cheers, the cheers of all the resisting ancients. The goddess will guide us to victory. At this moment, Avatar seemed to have exhausted all her strength and sang loudly, "The goddess will guide us to victory." It was as if she was born to be able to infect others, or perhaps it was because of the light on her body. People began to follow Avatar and shouted the name of the goddess. "Retreat, retreat to that side. The governor has been killed. This group of humans has the power to threaten us." Facing the horrifying aura of the ancients, a vampire in the inspection team, whose authority was second only to the governor, frowned and said, "Let this group of humans celebrate here first. They will never know the power of the superior nobles." One by one, the vampires began to fly back to the high wall and evacuated from the mating farm. The naturalized ancients in the inspection team, who couldn't fly, were now surrounded and had no chance to resist at all. At this moment, because of the retreat of the vampires, the morale of the ancients' descendants was pushed to the peak. They, a group of enslaved, oppressed, and even treated like livestock not long ago, but now these superior vampires were defeated. Wild cheers and howls filled the surroundings, and also filled the area around Anne. When Anne saw her kind looking at her and felt the fanatical gaze in their eyes that was more and more similar to Avatar's, she couldn't help but feel a little guilty. But accompanied by the cheers of the crowd, the ring on Anne's finger, the ring that originally had a few gems extinguished because of Avatar, instantly lit up again at this moment. Not only that, the remaining gems on the ring also completely lit up at this moment, turning into purple. All of them lit up? And looked at the ring on her finger in disbelief. At this moment, The ring seemed to be pulled by some kind of force and slowly fell off from Anne's finger. She was instantly shocked and reached out to grab it, but the ring suddenly flew out and then slowly fell somewhere, into the palm of a hand. And looked up and couldn't help but be startled. That mysterious merchant silently appeared in front of her, and subconsciously looked around her. Her kind who were rescued were still cheering for their victory, as if they didn't notice her actions at all, or even the appearance of this traveling merchant. "We meet again, Missin. The speed at which you completed the task was much faster than I expected." Boss Luo smiled at the ring in his hand. "Even, because I completed the task ahead of time, I had to temporarily leave and come over. Of course, I was also happy to do so. After all, Missin, you are really outstanding." And quickly shook her head and hurriedly asked, "I'm not interested in listening to your praises. You said that as long as I light up all the gems on this ring, you can send me out of here and let me live a new life. Now that all the gems are lit up, you won't go back on your words, right?" She was really afraid that this merchant would go back on his words. She deeply experienced the magic of this ring. Then, the merchant who gave her this ring would probably be even more bizarre than this ring, right? She had an instinctive fear of him from the bottom of her heart. She anxiously waited for his reply. "Of course." Boss Luo directly nodded and said rather casually, "I said that as long as you complete the task, I will send you out as a reward." "Are you really going to go back on your words?" And suddenly became a little nervous and directly screamed. Boss Luo shook his head and motioned her not to be too agitated. "I just want to say that the capacity of this ring is still too small. After all, it's a little bit of a pity. After all, there are still many people here who haven't been rescued. I'm done." And directly said, "You can find someone else for this kind of thing. Amanda can do it. I'll recommend her to you. She's born to do this kind of thing." Boss Luo indifferently said, "The Amanda you mentioned, are you referring to this lady?" He pointed forward, pointing at the woman in the crowd, who was now clasping her hands together and kneeling on the ground devoutly in the midst of everyone's joy. She was crying out of joy and praising the name of the goddess because she was touched. Every word she said couldn't be separated from Anne. Her every syllable seemed to be spoken for Anne's ears. Even without the ring in her hand, and subconsciously felt as if there was a wave of warmth flowing into her heart, suddenly, an indescribable feeling began to clog up Anne's heart, making her feel rather uncomfortable. "I already said that I'm not a goddess. Why doesn't this fellow listen to me?" And couldn't help but murmur softly, looking at Amanda's devoutness. "Yeah, why doesn't she listen to me?" Boss Luo said softly, and suddenly quivered when she looked at Luochu again. Her gaze was somewhat complicated as she asked, If I leave, Amanda, the people here, what will happen to them?" Boss Luo made a thoughtful expression and slowly said, "Basically, all of this is based on the ability of the ring. Now, Missin has completed the task, and I'll also take back this ring. I think, after I send you away and leave this place, they will probably return to their original state soon. After all, there are still many vampires. Once again, back to that kind of hell?" And couldn't help but become silent. Boss Luo smiled and waved his hand. In the crowd, a light door appeared silently. This light door opened in the middle of the crowd. People were still cheering, hugging each other, shedding tears, and singing the name of the goddess. "Miss and can go to a safe place after leaving here." Luochio's voice had some kind of magic. "As a reward, I'll give you a completely happy life. You'll enjoy the rest of your life as a rich person in a world completely dominated by humans." He stepped aside in front of the door and made an inviting gesture, just like a hotel's gatekeeper welcoming a guest, and didn't hesitate to step forward, step by step, towards the light door in the crowd. She knew that all the people here couldn't see at this moment. Because they couldn't see, they didn't know that the goddess they were singing about was about to abandon them at this moment. They were just like idiots, and stood in front of the light door. One of her feet even stepped into the light door. At this moment, a figure walked past the light door. naturally passing by in front of her eyes. Amanda! Anne's footsteps suddenly froze. Amanda seemed to be looking for something, looking around in panic. Her eyes kept shuttling back and forth in the crowd. She whispered something in a low voice. And couldn't hear it, but she felt that she was calling her own name. And grabbed her hair, directly squatted down, scratching her head in annoyance. After a while, she stopped this very indecent action and stood up again, retreating from the light door. Miss Anne, don't you want to go in? Or do you have doubts about what I said? Luochu asked in a low voice behind her. And raised her head, took a deep breath, and then a long sigh, muttering to herself, I'm just like an idiot, after that, and directly turned around. Hey, this ring, can you lend it to me for a while? Although I don't know why you want to light up the gem on the ring, this thing should be able to be taken away, right? If this is what you want, then I'll fill it up for you again. The price is that you lend it to me for a while. How about it? What an irresistible suggestion. Boss Luo smiled, but turned his hand, making the ring in his palm disappear in front of Anne's eyes. Anne's pupils contracted. But soon, another ring suddenly appeared in the air, and then slowly landed in front of Anne. Boss Luo's voice sounded slowly, Since Miss Anne has such an idea, then please use this ring. It has a bigger capacity. The design of the ring was similar to the previous one, but the difference was that there were not 10 small gems on it, but a whole one. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but when she stared at this big gem, she felt that she seemed to see a palace-like building inside. It seemed that there was a big world inside. Of course it was an illusion. And rubbed between her eyebrows, how could this be possible? If there was a world inside, her fingers would be crushed. Moreover, now was not the time to let her imagination run wild, because she appeared in front of everyone again. At this moment, Amanda was walking towards her quickly. The trace of fear on her face had disappeared, and was replaced by an angelic smile. Goddess, I'm just like an idiot. I'm just like an idiot, and laughed at herself, and then slowly put on the ring. Chapter 1403. In the palace, the nobles were discussing how to eat the food in front of them. The girl who was about to be eaten was frozen by a special method on her 18th birthday. When the freezer was opened, the naked girl appeared in front of the nobles in the cold air. The girl's body was covered with a thin layer of frost after being frozen for a long time. Even her hair and eyebrows were dyed with a layer of white. It was like a crystal. I'm about to defrost. The vampire who presented the girl to the nobles proudly picked up a dagger and grabbed the girl's arm. The vampire noble's action was quite gentle, as if he was holding the wrist of a dance partner. Then, he gently slit the girl's wrist with the dagger. Because the frozen blood was quite viscous, there was no splatter. The blood just seeped out of the girl's wrist little by little. He lifted the girl's wrist and kissed it gently. After sucking for a moment, he looked up at the nobles who couldn't restrain their instincts and showed their fangs. He smiled and said, "My family, why are you still waiting?" They began to surround the girl who seemed to be asleep, clustered around her. They began to smear each other's lips with blood, as if they were enjoying bliss. "Marquis Gouda, aren't you coming?" Marquis Gouda sat quietly at the side and just smiled at their invitation. Then he slowly stood up. As a prestigious vampire among the nobles, he shouldn't be unsociable. He was elegant and calm, but he didn't join in the fun at first. He just walked over slowly. "Come, my Marquis. This is the best seat specially prepared for you." The forthright noble who initiated the banquet used a dagger to gently slit the girl's neck. The blood seeped out of the carotid artery faster than other places. Perhaps it really had good intentions. Marquis Gouda smiled and nodded. At this moment, an untimely sound broke the noble's joy. It was the sound of the door being opened rudely. Due to the excessive force, the door slammed into the walls on both sides, and the one who appeared in front of the door was a vampire wearing a patrol uniform. When Marquis Gouda saw this, his eyes lit up slightly, and a wisp of a mysterious smile appeared on the corners of his mouth because of this. The nobles were unable to call out the vampire's name for the time being, but most of the nobles were dissatisfied with the interruption of their feast. But they soon remembered something. Before they ate, they were actually discussing whether they should awaken the Grand Duke of the clan in advance. And the reason why the Grand Duke was awakened was because Bazabi had disregarded the objections of the nobles and forcefully prohibited them from eating normally. The instigator of this banquet immediately became angry. Facing the motionless guard standing in front of the door, he angrily rebuked, "I think you need to give all of us nobles a reasonable explanation. Really, you should understand that even if your immediate superior, Busby, holds the authority of the clan, our status is still much nobler than yours, sir." But in the face of the nobles yelling, the patrolling vampires in front of the door did not react at all. They still stood there motionless. "Listen. I had kept this food in cold storage before, so it wasn't included in Busby's new rules. Now, get out of here right now." The infuriated noble snorted coldly. In the afternoon, Bobo was the happiest because he was dissatisfied with Busby's new rules and was beheaded in the end. He didn't feel too much, so he didn't take Marquis Gouda's proposal to heart. But now a small low-level noble dared to be so arrogant in front of him. The instigator of the banquet, who felt that his authority and identity as a superior noble had been completely insulted, was already thinking about whether he could agree with Marquis Gouda's proposal. Anyway, after awakening the Grand Duke, Marquis Gouda would bear the consequences. Finally, the vampire in front of the door reacted. He suddenly took a step forward and then fell directly to the ground. This scene caused all the nobles in the room to reveal astonished expressions. Marquis Gouda even frowned, and a trace of doubt flashed through his eyes. And the doubt in his eyes immediately turned into shock. Whoa! A black flame suddenly appeared behind the vampire, who fell to the ground at this time, and then swallowed the vampire at a terrifying speed. In just a few breaths, the patrolling guard was directly burned to ashes. Nothing was left. What happened? The nobles were startled and then looked at each other. Who did this? They asked each other doubtfully. They thought that a noble secretly killed the vampire because he didn't like it. But who would use this black flame? There didn't seem to be such a guy among the superior nobles of the clans. Just as the nobles were puzzled, a figure slowly appeared in front of the door. She was wearing a black robe, and her cheeks were split in two. One side was the appearance of an exquisite classical beauty, while the other side was burning with a black flame. Her appearance was extremely strange. "Where are the guards?" A noble frowned. "Guards?" But there was no response. At this moment, the black-robed woman looked around. When her gaze landed on the ice chest and saw the girl who was frozen and had cuts on her body, her gaze became cold and sharp. "Why is there such a dirty creature in the world?" The black-robed woman's voice was like a knife. "This must be a mistake made by the Creator, so he created you. How dare you?" The black-robed woman suddenly waved her hand, and a vigorous black flame suddenly appeared in her palm, and then splashed out like a bonfire that was kicked away. The nobles in the room didn't know what this black flame was. They even directly reached out to slap it without caring. Of course, there were also some who rolled up their cloaks, intending to sweep the black flame away. Unexpectedly, this black flame was extremely strange. It would ignite when touched and couldn't be extinguished at all, except for some nobles who directly dodged. The nobles who touched the black flame all had black flames on their bodies. They were burned by the black flame at a terrifying speed. They fell to the ground and rolled in pain. Painful screams filled the whole room, and the black-robed woman slowly walked into the room amidst the miserable screams. As the black flame burned, she also harvested the lives of the nobles. The black flame was replenished by a large amount at this time, and it was as if it was a substance and actually flowed around her. A vampire nobleman who was lucky enough to escape the attack appeared behind the black-robed woman in a flash, and pounced on her back. However, the flowing flames around the black-robed woman seemed to have a mind of their own. When the nobleman was about to approach, the black flames directly transformed into a huge palm, and with an even faster speed, it directly grasped the nobleman tightly. The nobleman who launched the sneak attack, at this time, screamed more miserably than the wailing nobles present. His body even directly vaporized in an instant. As the nobles were burned to ashes by the black flame one by one, the remaining nobles were instantly terrified. They were already in a high position, and had wantonly enjoyed hundreds of years, and had long forgotten how to fight. Even when they fought with the werewolves for generations, they only discussed, laughed, and enjoyed in the safety of the castle. They still had great power, but they had forgotten how to use it. No one would resist them. In the territory of the clan, except for the Grand Duke, they were the highest group. Even the acting Grand Duke couldn't neglect them. Guards! A nobleman rushed out of the door in horror at this time. But the moment he was about to rush out of the door, the black flame burned from the floor, and instantly sealed the door completely. Facing the strange and terrifying flame, the nobleman who intended to escape had to stop his body in horror. Bang, bang, bang! At the same time, the black flame from the black-robed woman began to burn everything in the room. The flame turned the room into a purgatory. In the crazy burning, the nobles died one after another. Marquis Gouda quietly retreated with cold sweat. He already knew who the black-robed woman who suddenly broke in was. The vampire killer. The guard sent by Busby had already informed him of this news, but he concealed this news and didn't tell all the nobles here, because it felt that this vampire killer was just exaggerating. It might even be some trick of Busby's. He was keen on politics and had always been unwilling to submit to Balogan. Now that Balogan left without permission and even transferred the clan's authority to Busby, who wasn't even a noble, he saw a wonderful opportunity to attack Balogan. But assassins really do exist, and it was so terrifying. Although these upper-level nobles were all rotten and had forgotten their fighting instincts, they were still incomparable to the lower-level nobles. Marquis Gouda forced himself to calm down. He analyzed the situation in front of him and made a final judgment. He shouldn't confront this mysterious killer head-on. He found an opportunity to observe the flow of the flame, then suddenly spread his wings and crashed into the ceiling, intending to break through the palace and escape. He succeeded. In an instant, he broke through the ceiling and came to the upper level of the palace. Marquis Gouda looked back at the black flame below and couldn't help but feel lucky. But in the next second, its rejoicing instantly turned into fear, because an arm made of black flame stretched out at this moment and directly grabbed his body, fiercely dragging him back and forth in the sea of black flame. Before dying, Marquis Gouda only had one extremely regretful thought. He shouldn't have secretly removed most of the guards in the palace, and even let his confidants pretend to be Busby's men in order to stimulate the other nobles so that they would agree to awaken the clan's Grand Duke. Even the confidants who pretended to be Busby's men were directly eliminated by the vampire killer before they could even start the plan. But he wasn't willing to die like this. In the pain of being burned by the black flame, Marquis Gouda suddenly stretched out his hand and directly pulled out his heart. Then, he used his last bit of strength to throw out the heart. Boom! Finally, the black flame filled the entire room and finally exploded, destroying the entire luxurious room. Half of the outer wall of the palace directly collapsed at this moment. Marquis Gouda's heart, at this moment, was successfully thrown into the grass in the front yard of the palace before the black flame touched it. The heart was still beating. All of a sudden, someone picked up the heart. The heart was beating strongly in a fair hand. Although the physical body was dead, the soul of the Marquis was still there. His spiritual will was preserved by the heart. But this preservation didn't last long. "It's you." Marquis Gouda's voice came from the beating heart. The Marquis found that the one who picked up his heart was Balogan's confidant that he wanted to eliminate, Busby. But at this time, it was naturally not the time to show his hostility to Busby. The Marquis hurriedly said, "Oh, that's great, my dear Busby, I didn't expect it to be you. Quick, send me to the blood pool. I need blood to be reborn." Holding Marquis Gouda's heart, Busby indifferently sized it up. He came to track the vampire killer, but seemed to be one step slower. "Busby, why are you still in a daze? Quickly send me to the blood pool. I need blood for my body to be reborn." Marquis Gouda's voice became anxious again. "I will remember this favor of yours. Believe me, I will give you a reward that you can't imagine. It seems that you didn't do your duty well. You only have yourself to blame," Busby said coldly. At the same time, he sized up the gradually extinguishing black flame in the palace in front of him. At the same time, Busby's palm began to slowly squeeze the Marquis's heart. "What do you want to do, Busby? How dare you?" The Marquis was not angry for too long, because Busby had directly crushed the heart at this time. So, the Marquis was only left with a shrill scream in the end. Its voice even faded away very quickly. The crushed heart began to overflow with some thick, dark golden blood. Busby was expressionless. He just raised his head and raised the heart high above his mouth. He began to swallow the blood that was squeezed out of the heart. The amount of dark golden blood was not much, at most a dozen drops. After swallowing the blood, Busby directly threw the Marquis's heart on the ground. The heart instantly withered and finally melted into a puddle of black mud-like matter. This meant that not only could Marquis Gouda not be reborn, but he would also disappear forever. Busby reached out and wiped his lips, slowly exhaling a breath, and said in a low voice, "Superior nobles are indeed the best tonics raised by the Grand Duke. No wonder Baligan raised you so generously." As he said, Busby looked up and saw a figure slowly descending under the support of the black flame. "Traitor, we meet again." The woman in the black robe. Meow looked at Busby, and her gaze suddenly became sharper. Busby was silent for a while before slowly saying, "You know me?" Chapter 1404. It was not the first time Busby heard the word traitor from her mouth. But Busby did not attack this vampire killer immediately. What he swallowed was the essence of Marquis Gouda's life, the power of the highest-ranking vampire in the clan. Even if he could adapt to the high concentration of the noble's blood essence, his body would need some time to adapt to it. Of course, this time would not be too long. "It seems like you have been calling me a traitor all this time," Busby said indifferently, "but in fact, I don't even have the slightest impression of who you are. So, what is your basis? Have you forgotten so quickly?" Mekong could not help but sneer. "It has only been 10 years since we last met, and you have already forgotten me, Busby." Busby. That was indeed his name. But Busby was not too surprised that she could call out his name. As the superior of the patrol guards, his name was not a secret. Just a little bit of asking, and even without asking, she would know his name. "Sorry, I don't know what you are talking about. 10 years ago." Looking at the situation, this woman should have discovered the truth after she became an adult 10 years ago, so she started to hold a grudge against vampires. But 10 years ago, he was already a vampire. Even earlier than that, he was from that place, that abyss. How could he have anything to do with her? What's wrong? Have you completely forgotten your past after becoming a vampire? Mekong walked closer step by step. The black flame on her cheeks kept burning and swaying. "Then, let me give you a good reminder." He silently estimated the degree of adaptation of his body to Marquis Gouda's blood essence, and did not move. Mekong's voice was like the sound of glass being scraped. It was very harsh. "Your name is Busby, your character is noble young master. But because this persona is too ordinary, you have never been named by the nobles. Instead, your sister, a sickly beauty Mina, has been loved by many nobles. Since she was 12 years old, your sister has never stopped being named." Busby just looked at her indifferently. He did not respond to her words. Mina's character was not sickly beauty. At all, she was? Later, Mina died before she became an adult, because she was named too many times, and she was born very weak. In the end, she could not withstand the crazy demands of the nobles. Just a month before her 18th birthday, Mina, who was named for the last time, was directly sucked dry of all her blood by a noble who could not control himself. Busby was still expressionless. But suddenly, something in his memory, something blurred, as if it was just a fleeting shadow, it could not be touched. Later, when you saw your sister's corpse, you were too agitated that night and got into a conflict with the inspectors. You were thrown into the water dungeon and were only released a month later. Cockroaches, maggots, rats, a foul stench, and the sound of chains clanging against each other. Roar, roar, hatred, despair, something flashed in Busby's mind again. Mekong was still approaching, her voice was getting closer at the same time. When you appeared in front of us again, the hatred in your eyes was frightening. But you were like a flag, giving us, those who directly collapsed after knowing the truth, the motivation to continue moving forward. You said you wanted revenge. You said you wanted to take back the things that were taken away by the vampires. You said, no matter how long it took, no matter how much pain you had to endure, you would never give up. More and more things flashed in his mind. Busby subconsciously shook his head slightly. Facing Mekong's approach for the first time, he took a small step back. But this step did not shorten the distance between them. She finally came in front of Busby, reached out her hand and gently stroked his cheek. She looked up and said, "All of us trusted you so much. Even though we were tortured in the mating farm, we had the courage to live because of you. Because, every time we were desperate, you would always stand up and challenge the vampire's authority again and again. You were exposed to the sun by the vampires in the square again and again. You were put down again and again with half of your life left. You were treated like a toy by the vampires time and time again." Busby suddenly took a deep breath, and the bat wings on his back instantly spread out. At this moment, Mekong's voice suddenly became cold. "But why? Why did you give in to them in the end? Why did you become the thing you hated the most in the end? Why did you betray us?" Whoosh! Baz, bye! Traitor! Accompanied by Mekong's sharp cry, a black flame soared into the sky. After swallowing many vampire guards and nobles, the power of the black flame seemed to have reached a terrifying level. A giant made of black flame floated slowly behind Mekong. It looked like a giant made of fire. In the air, Busby looked at the giant made of black flame in shock. It swallowed Mekong directly, or in other words, protected her in its body. The black flame had no heat, but it could burn almost everything. He had experienced it once before, but he didn't expect. The power of the black flame seemed to be even more terrifying this time. Traitor! A traitor who is willing to be their lackey. Mekong's voice changed. At this moment, Mekong was like a machine that had lost control. Accompanied by her angry roar, the black flame giant instantly roared to the sky. Bam, 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 bam! Along with the giant's angry roar, black flame bullets shot out from its body, indiscriminately shooting in all directions. The terrifying burning power of the black flame instantly burned everything it touched into ashes. This thing couldn't be touched by the body. Busby kept dodging the flame bullets, thinking about how to deal with this extremely troublesome killer. "Master Busby!" The movement instantly alerted the patrolling guards in the town. The black flame giant that was almost 20 meters tall was so conspicuous in this small town of the Wolf Farm. "Don't come over!" Busby shouted coldly. "Everyone, listen to my order, don't come near here. Then evacuate all the crops, as fast as you can. You must ensure the safety of the crops, as soon as possible." "Yes, master." After giving the order, Busby took a deep breath and glanced at the office building. If this killer's target was only him, if you really like me like this, then use all of your abilities to kill me. He looked at Mekong, who was covered in flames, and said in a deep voice, "Let me see how strong your so-called hatred is." He planned to lure the vampire killer away from the town so that he could minimize the damage to the farm. His provocation seemed to have succeeded in provoking the enraged Meow Meow that seemed to have gone out of control. At this moment, the black flame giant twisted its body and followed Mekong as it chased after Busby's step. As the saying goes, peeping for a while is fun, peeping for a while is fun, peeping for a while is fun. This saying could be applied to the current Kelowna Shinryu. Ever since the size issue was agreed upon, the true dragon of the Divine Prefecture had temporarily thrown the matter of that cheap disciple, the Radiance Tower Master, to the back of his mind. He began to send even more sharp questions to this intelligence channel. He couldn't stop even if he wanted to. It was like a primary school student hiding under his blanket in the middle of the night and secretly pushing Goldie YouTube without telling his parents. He thought that as long as he finished reading this chapter, he would immediately go to sleep. However, as soon as he finished reading one chapter, he would immediately start reading one chapter after another, unable to stop at all. Finally, after the routine questions were basically satisfied, the true dragon of China suddenly swallowed her saliva. She sneakily looked around her again. After confirming that there was still no one around, she added another dozens of layers of enchantments on top of the original dozens of layers of enchantments as psychological comfort. Only then did she dare to ask more boldly with a strong breath. Have you done it before? These two. I mean, your boss and that person." She got the answer. The true dragon of the godly land held her breath all of a sudden and raised her voice. But after a while, the answer to this question could not be poured into her head. What was going on? Just when the Kelowna Shinryu was about to lose her patience, a message that almost made her explode was slowly transmitted into her mind. After the message was translated, it was something like this: "Frowny face, dear VIP user, since your information fee has reached the limit of the signed bill, please continue to use our information channel after this fee is paid. Luaccio. F*CKU. You'd better. Rumble." The whole villa shook slightly. Long Shirua was startled. She frowned and waved her hand to disperse the hundreds of barriers. Then, she hurriedly pulled open the curtains and looked outside. From here, she could see the situation in the farm, but at this moment, what appeared in front of her was a sea of black fire. Burning, the whole farm was burning. In this sea of black fire, she could vaguely see a flame giant moving in the sea of fire. The flame giant kept waving its hands as if it was waving something. Long Shirua frowned. The black flame in front of her gave her a very familiar feeling. "It's not the scheming maids. What's going on?" The Kelowna Shinryu frowned and went out from the window. Then, she quickly circled around the villa. Finally, she met the maid, who was also looking at the scene on the balcony. The Shinryu and the maid's eyes met directly. The atmosphere became tense instantly. "The moths outside. Are they your doing again?" After a moment of silence, Long Shirua asked in a low voice. At the same time, she looked around and said, "Where's your boss? Miss Long seems to care about my master very much." The maid smiled and said, "If there's anything, I can convey it to him. But he's not here now. Even if there's something, he won't tell you. He's not here." The Kelowna Shinryu frowned and pointed at the flame that destroyed everything in the town. "What's wrong with this thing? I can smell your scent from it." The maid said indifferently, before answering Miss Long's question, "I hope Miss Long can answer my question first." Long Shirua said unhappily, "What's the question?" Yu Yi said, "Is the inhuman territory also under Miss Long's protection?" "Of course not." The Kelowna Shinryu snorted and said unhappily, "You mean, this has nothing to do with me and I shouldn't interfere, isn't it?" The maid smiled and said, "Or, Miss Long, because my master—" What about me? Make it clear." The Kelowna Shinryu panicked and looked around. Miss Servant Girl chuckled. I mean, Miss Long, are you taking advantage of my master's interest in you, so you want to do something to influence my master in turn, right? Oh, Long Shirua was never afraid of anyone. If I can influence your master, it's because of my ability, right? On the other hand, if you can't correct your master, doesn't that mean you're a failure? The maid and the Shinryu looked at each other again. After a while, the maid said indifferently, Miss Long, you know, if there's a good reason, even without my master's permission, I can do it. Long Shirua also wanted to know the depth of this scheming maid. She raised her eyebrows and sneered. Do you want to fight? To be honest, I don't like you for a long time. At this moment, Yu Yi slowly floated up. She spread her hands slightly, and black flames condensed into roses, blooming around her. Don't worry, this is not Kelowna, so I'll take good care of you after all. Yu Yi chuckled. Anyway, Miss Long is a rare VIP. If I offend you, my master will blame me. So annoying. You call me master every time you open your mouth. Without this master, you'll die. I'd like to see if your master will feel heartache if I hurt you. The Kelowna Shinryu sneered. She could be cowardly in front of anything, except this scheming woman. Because this was a battle between women. On the phone. Xian 81 Chinese. Chapter 1405. Once a woman decided to take action, she wouldn't stop until she calmed down, no matter if it was a queen in a high position or a harmless girl next door. It seemed that they were born with a trait that was more stubborn than men. And even if they did take action, most of them wouldn't admit that they were impulsive. Instead, they would try their best to find a reason for their behavior, and they would succeed in finding numerous reasons. What's wrong with wanting to hit this scheming woman? Can't a woman be stubborn for once? That's probably the reason, Long Shirua. Why would she have such an unwise idea, and even take action to carry out such an idea? It's really puzzling. But it's not bad to take action. It's a strange feeling of satisfaction. That's probably the reason, Miss Maid. No matter what the reason was, the beautiful rose wall maze of the villa had turned into ashes the moment they started fighting. Facing the scheming maid from the mysterious shop, Kelowna Shinryu, who didn't know her background, didn't intend to test her from the beginning. Instead, she launched an attack under the limit of the inhuman realm. Miss Maid also didn't intend to destroy them in human realm, because of such an attack. She just adjusted her power to the limit of the inhuman realm. Whether it was Shinryu from Kelowna or the maid from the club, they could easily adjust their power levels to this extent, but when both of them adjusted their power levels to the same level, it would take a long time to determine the winner. Their battle was outside the farm, separated by a small hill. That's right, it was in the woods where Kelowna Shinryu beat up the golden dragon in the evening. Bang! They had never seen such a Miss Maid before. She didn't even use any elegant fighting skills. She simply jumped and punched. Her black and white maid dress fluttered in the night sky, like a fairy in the night. Her body was still beautiful, but her punches caused the ground to collapse, crack, and then scatter. It was just a punch on the ground, but it directly caused the whole woods to collapse. Countless fireflies scattered rapidly in the disaster, trying to escape from this unexpected disaster. But apparently, this was not the only destructive force. The power of the true dragon of the divine land, at least at this moment, was no less than the true dragon's power. Why did you suddenly reappear in Kelowna after disappearing for 100 years? Not giving in to each other, there were also very sharp questions. I'm just a maid. The shop was moved by the owner's wish. I can't answer you, Mississippi Long. Maybe you can try the information channel that Master gave you. Bang bang! During the brief exchange, Kelowna Shinryu and Miss Maid had attacked each other for more than 10 rounds. This was almost the highest standard battle in the modern world. Even if both of them tacitly limited their power to the limit of the inhuman realm, the battle still shook the inhuman realm. This kind of shaking wasn't local. The instability of the space caused a complicated chain reaction, like the ocean currents flowing to the other side of the ocean. It was hard to estimate the influence of this kind of influence on different regions and different races in the inhuman realm. But no matter what kind of influence it would have in the future, Kelowna Shinryu and the club maid obviously didn't intend to stop fighting. Why did the previous owner transfer the shop to the current owner? Why did you destroy his original life? Miss Long, could it be that you already know my current master before this? Don't you think it's too one-sided to destroy? One-sided? Why can't this kind of one-sided story be just your side of the story? In the end, you're just loyal to the shop. For you, it doesn't matter whether the owner changes or not, right? Kelowna Shinryu's cold tone suddenly reached a new height. Humph, you seem to be loyal to your current owner. But if one day the owner changes again, will you still fight with him like this? I guess you'll forget about him very soon. Just like how you treat your previous owner now. Mississippi Maid suddenly stopped and lowered her head. Kelowna Shinryu didn't know what Maid was going to do next, so she hurriedly stopped herself. This should be a great opportunity, but Long Shirua had suffered a lot in the hands of this scheming maid, so she instinctively became cautious. At the same time, she suddenly felt a kind of joy of gaining the upper hand. She actually gained the upper hand in this battle of words. What? Did I hit the nail on the head? Kelowna Shinryu, who got a certain kind of pleasure, suddenly couldn't stop and continued to say, "What's the saying again? A shop owner with flowing water, a maid made of iron, it's talking about you, right? Tut tut, you're always like this. You won't stop pleasing a new owner, right? Tut tut tut." Her voice was so loud, in contrast, Mississippi Maid lowered her head and was absolutely silent at this moment. The atmosphere seemed to become weird all of a sudden. Long Shirua frowned, wondering why Maid didn't fight back at this moment. She didn't dare to be careless at this moment. Suddenly, the black flame around Mississippi Maid disappeared little by little. She slowly stretched out her right hand, and gathered the last bit of black flame in her palm. And the last bit of black flame was extinguished at this moment. From strong to weak, and then to the point where he could kill her with a gentle touch. At this moment, Mississippi Maid had become infinitely weak in the perception of the true dragon of the divine land. A slight sound was suddenly born at this moment. It was like the sound of a match being struck. It was a cluster of pure white flame that Long Shirua had never seen before. It was born miraculously from the last bit of black flame in her palm. At this moment, Yu Yi gently waved her palm at this moment, and the white flame instantly stretched out. Then a flag with a sharp blade flashed out. Mississippi Maid suddenly raised her head, staring at Kelowna Shinryu, who was dozens of meters away. Her deep blue eyes turned completely black at this moment. Black pupils. At the same time, Mississippi Maid disappeared. At the moment when Mississippi Maid's white flame was born and the flag appeared, Kelowna Shinryu felt the most terrible crisis ever. She suddenly realized that the maid in front of her didn't seem to be as tolerant as she imagined. In fact, she was actually easier to provoke than she imagined. She didn't have time to think about it. At the moment when Mississippi Maid disappeared, Shinryu Kelowna felt a great crisis. She didn't care whether the inhuman realm could withstand the explosion of Shinryu's power or not. At the moment of explosion, Mississippi Maid broke through the limitation of space and flashed in front of Shinryu Kelowna. The flag in her hand was like a spear, drawing a white light. Xian Yuan, at this moment, Long Shirua instinctively summoned all her strength and even subconsciously called something. But in fact, she had forgotten that this was not Kelowna. It was impossible to summon Xian Yuan here. She didn't have the thing she wanted to call in her hand. She even waved her hand to the flag in Yu Ye's hand, which was burning with white flame. There was no sound, as if everything returned to a flat surface. A sharp art knife quietly cut the flat surface. Long Shirua's pupils suddenly contracted. She saw her arm separated from her shoulder, and at the same time felt something cut her body. A huge wound extended from her left shoulder all the way to her abdomen. Bright red blood mixed with specks of golden light burst out in an instant. She heard a boom in her brain, and then her mind went blank. Her body fell to the ground directly. Bang! The true dragon of the divine land who had fallen to the ground spat out a mouthful of blood. Her left arm had been cut off below the elbow. The severed arm was not far away. Such a crushing defeat brought a greater blow to Shinryu Kelowna than the time when Shinryu's power was confined and she had to turn into a child. She didn't have time to think. In the night sky, the flag with white flame formed a straight line with Mississippi made directly pierced Long Shiru. Sister Long. In the distance, an anxious and frightened voice suddenly sounded. Butterfly monster Luo Dance unfolded her colorful wings. The cry of butterfly monster didn't stop Miss Maid at this moment. The sharp spearhead on the flag was like a ray of light. A ray of light as bright as the sun burst in front of Long Shiru. Sister Long! Luo Dance screamed again. Gulp! She couldn't even control her throat well, swallowing a mouthful of saliva. Long Shirua's forehead was full of cold sweat, staring at the spearhead sticking to her cheek and finally piercing into the ground. Don't tell me that you missed because of a mistake. Or. Long Shirua forced a smile with a drop of cold sweat quietly falling down. Are you going to observe the posture of a loser to satisfy your present pleasure? But it's a pity that I'm too thick-skinned to be depressed at all. The black pupils of Mississippi Maid seemed to have recovered. The white flame flag in her hand even dispersed with the wind. She regained her original elegance. But there was something different on her face. One more time, even if it's in Kelowna. I won't miss. She stared at Long Shirua expressionlessly. I only have one master and only one in the future, forever. She turned and left, leaving no time for Shinryu of Kelowna to speak. At this moment, Butterfly Monster hurriedly stopped, but at the moment she met Mississippi Maid, she suddenly showed a frightened and flustered expression. This time, Mississippi Maid looked at Butterfly Monster and said indifferently, "Her arm is over there. If you pick it up now, you should be able to connect it back." Butterfly Monster suddenly quivered, hurriedly running towards the direction indicated by Yu Yi. She found Sister Long's arm in the soil. But when the little Butterfly Monster turned around with her arms crossed, the maid from the club had already gone back. Sister Long, your arm. Luo Dance had to send the broken arm to Long Shiru. But at this time, Kelowna of Shinryu didn't seem to care about the arm, just lying on the ground, letting the wound bleed, but the wound was healing quickly. Sister Long, arm. Luo Dance had to remind her again. Kelowna of Shinryu moved his neck, glancing at Butterfly Monster beside him. A smile suddenly appeared on his gloomy face. Put it on my wound, it will heal naturally. The little Butterfly Monster followed the instructions of the true dragon of the divine land. After cleaning up the soil on the broken arm, she carefully placed the broken arm on the cut surface of the wound. When the broken arm touched the wound, traces of blood began to stretch out, entangling with the wound, and then the broken arm was restored little by little. Looking at this magical scene, she suddenly thought of the golden dragon, Fafnir. She wondered if it was possible to restore his male body in this way. But Fafnir had cut off his own organs, and she did not know where they were. After a while, the broken arm was fixed. Long Shirua sat up with the help of Butterfly Monster. Sister Long, don't fight with Sister Yu Yi next time. It's not good. She puffed up her cheeks in a fit of pique. There won't be a next time. Long Shirua suddenly shook her head. If there's a next time, maybe I won't exist anymore, Sister Long? Long Shirua touched Butterfly Monster's head, saying weakly, "That's why I said there won't be a next time. What are you worried about?" Luo Dance was confused. But Sister Long, why did you provoke Sister Yu Yi? Provoke? Kelowna's Shinryu shook her head. Whatever you say. But I just wanted to confirm something at first. Confirm something? She obviously didn't understand. Long Shirua didn't intend to explain too much. She just looked at the direction where Miss Maid disappeared. Kelowna's Shinryu muttered to herself in an inconceivable tone. She was actually so furious because of these words. I can only assume that she was serious. So, maybe she didn't use the shop as a means to tie him up. Anyway, she didn't understand. Luo Dance just sat beside Long Shirua like a duck, looking at Sister Long in a daze. After a while, Kelowna's Shinryu suddenly raised the broken arm, but the shape of the arm was a bit weird. Kelowna's Shinryu said expressionlessly, "You fixed my arm upside down, so let's do it the old way." What? Butterfly Monster suddenly held her head, jumping around Long Shirua, as if she was laughing and playing. It didn't look like a terrible battle had just happened here. However, a small crack appeared at the edge of the inhuman domain because of this battle. It was like a curtain covering the backstage of a stage. When the gap suddenly opened a little, a scarlet eyeball appeared. It was like a chameleon's eyeball, turning strangely,